I'm Marcus Chen, 34, and for the past 2 years, I've been raising 3 kids completely alone after my ex-wife Sarah walked out on us. What I didn't know was that during those months of supervised visits, she was slowly poisoning my children's minds against me, whispering lies about how Daddy abandoned us and how I chose work over family. The devastation of watching my own children flinch when I tried to hug them nearly broke me. But when I discovered the real reason behind Sarah's manipulation and the secret she's been hiding that could change everything, I realized this wasn't just about custody anymore. There was more at stake than shared weekends and court orders. She wasn't just hurting me, she was shaping the way our children saw the world and themselves, and I couldn't let that continue. Sometimes the truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, and sometimes the parent who seems to have lost everything is actually the one holding all the cards. If you've ever felt the pain of being misunderstood by those you love most, stay with me for this story. I still remember the day I met Sarah like it was yesterday, though sometimes I wish I could forget it entirely. It was October 2012, our senior year at UC Berkeley. I was hunched over my engineering textbooks in the library's quiet section when this whirlwind of energy crashed into my carefully ordered world. She was studying psychology, all passionate theories about human behavior and helping people heal. Her laugh could fill an entire room, and when she smiled at me that first day, asking if she could share my table, I felt like the luckiest guy alive. We were inseparable after that. Sarah had this way of making everything feel more vivid, more important. She'd drag me away from my calculations to watch sunsets, to try new restaurants, to just talk for hours about our dreams. She wanted to open a family therapy practice someday, help kids and parents communicate better. I wanted to design bridges that would last centuries. Together we planned a life that felt unbreakable. The engagement came 2 years after graduation. I'd saved 4 months to buy her the ring she'd casually mentioned liking in a jewelry store window. We were walking along the same campus path where we'd met, and I got down on one knee right there by the library steps. She cried, I cried, and every passerby stopped to cheer for us. It was perfect. Our wedding was small but beautiful. Sarah's parents flew in from Ohio, my family came from San Francisco, and we exchanged vows in her hometown's little chapel. In the photos we're both glowing, completely wrapped up in each other and the future we were building. I keep that wedding album in my desk drawer now. I can't bring myself to look at it often, but I can't throw it away either. Emma came first. Born on a snowy February morning in 2016, Sarah had insisted on natural childbirth, and after 18 hours of labor, our daughter arrived screaming and perfect. I held her for the first time and understood immediately what people meant when they talked about unconditional love. Sarah was exhausted but radiant, and we spent those first weeks in a bubble of new parent bliss, taking turns walking the floors at 3 a.m. and marveling at every tiny sound Emma made. Jake followed 2 years later. Easier birth but just as miraculous. By then, I'd been promoted to senior engineer at Morrison & Associates, and we'd bought our first real house, a 3-bedroom colonial with a big backyard perfect for kids. Sarah had put her therapy practice dreams on hold to stay home with the babies, something she said she wanted to do. I worked long hours, but it felt worth it. Every paycheck meant security for our growing family. Little Lily completed us in 2020, right before the world changed. She was our surprise baby, conceived during what Sarah laughingly called our quarantine romance. Even with all the chaos of the pandemic, Lily's birth felt like pure joy. I remember standing in the hospital room, masked and careful, watching Sarah hold our newest daughter while Emma and Jake peeked at their sister through the window via video call. Those early years felt like everything we'd dreamed of in college. Saturday mornings meant pancakes and cartoons. Sundays were for family bike rides and playground adventures. I'd come home from work to find Sarah reading to the kids, or helping Emma with puzzles, or teaching Jake to count. The house was always full of laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. I was working hard, yes, but it was all for them. Every late night at the office meant better healthcare, a bigger college fund, the family vacations Sarah pinned on her Pinterest boards. I thought I was being the provider she needed, the father my children deserved. I thought we were happy. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way Sarah's smile became a little tighter when I had to work weekends. How she stopped talking about her therapy practice dreams. The subtle shift from we to I when she talked about raising the kids. But at the time, it just felt like normal family adjustments. Everyone said the first few years of parenting were the hardest. I never imagined that the life we'd built so carefully, the love story that started in a college library, would become the battlefield it eventually turned into. I never thought the woman who cried tears of joy at our wedding would one day use our children as weapons against me. But that's the thing about trust. When you give it completely, you never see the betrayal coming until it's already destroyed everything you held dear. The first crack appeared so subtly I almost missed it entirely. It was a Tuesday evening in March 2022, and I'd come home from what had been a particularly brutal day at work. The Henderson Bridge project was behind schedule, and my boss had made it clear that my promotion to project manager depended on bringing it back on track. I walked through the front door at 8:30 p.m., exhausted but grateful to be home. The house was unusually quiet. No sounds of children playing, no TV murmuring in the background. I found Sarah in the kitchen, mechanically loading the dishwasher with an efficiency that felt almost violent. "Hey, beautiful," I said, moving to kiss her cheek. She didn't turn around. "The kids ate dinner 3 hours ago," she said flatly. "I saved you a plate. It's cold. I'm sorry." The client meeting ran long, and then there's always something, isn't there, Marcus? She finally looked at me, and something in her eyes made my stomach drop. Emma asked where Daddy was during her bedtime story. "Jake wanted to show you his drawing from school." Lily kept saying Dada every time the door opened. I pulled out my phone, showing her my carefully maintained calendar. Color-coded blocks showed work commitments, family time, weekend activities. "Look, I've been tracking everything. I'm home for dinner 4 nights a week. I take the kids to the park every Saturday morning. And when was the last time you and I had a real conversation?" Sarah interrupted. "Not about schedules or bills or who's picking up groceries. When did we last talk about dreams, or feelings, or anything that matters?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't remember. When had we stopped talking about her therapy practice? When had our conversations become purely logistical? "I'm working for us," I said quietly. "The promotion means better insurance, a bigger salary. I don't need you to provide for me like I'm some helpless child. Marcus, I need you to be present. I need you to want to be here." The conversation ended there, but something had shifted between us. Over the following weeks, I started noticing things I'd been too busy to see. How Sarah's face would close off when I checked work emails during family time. The way she'd grown quiet during our bedtime conversations. Just nodding along when I talked about office politics or project deadlines. I tried to make adjustments. I bought tickets to a concert Sarah had mentioned wanting to see, but the babysitter cancelled and we ended up staying home. I planned a romantic dinner out, but I got called back to the office for an emergency client meeting. Each failed attempt seemed to prove her point more clearly than words ever could. By April, the silences had grown longer. Sarah stopped asking about my day. She'd smile and nod when I talked, but I could see her attention drifting. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out the kitchen window with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it sadness, resentment, longing for something else? The kids began to notice too. Emma, always perceptive for her age, started asking why Mommy seemed sad. Jake would crawl into bed between us on Sunday mornings, chattering about his dreams, and I'd see Sarah, watching me over his head with those same unreadable eyes. I threw myself deeper into work, telling myself it was temporary. Once the Henderson project was complete, once I got the promotion, once we paid off the credit cards from Lily's medical bills, then I'd have more time. Then things would get better. But Sarah was retreating further each day. She started going to bed earlier, claiming exhaustion. Our weekend family activities became Sarah taking the kids to the park while I caught up on project reports. She'd come home with stories of other families they'd met, other fathers who coached Little League or helped with school fundraisers. Tom Walsh was there with his daughter, she'd say, unpacking the diaper bag. He said he's taking a sabbatical from his law practice to spend more time with his kids. Can you imagine choosing family over career advancement? The dig was gentle but unmistakable. I wanted to explain that law partners had different options than engineering employees, that my industry didn't work the same way. But every explanation sounded like an excuse, even to me. The breaking point came on Emma's 7th birthday. I'd promised to leave work early to help set up for her party, but a structural review meeting ran until 6 p.m. I arrived home to find Sarah surrounded by deflated balloons and unopened decorations, looking at me with the kind of disappointment that cuts straight through you. She kept asking if Daddy was coming to help make her party special, Sarah said, her voice so quiet I had to strain to hear it. I kept saying yes, you'd be here soon. Emma bounded into the room at that moment, still in her school clothes, face streaked with tears from what was clearly an epic meltdown. "Daddy, you're here. Can you help with my butterfly decorations now?" I knelt down to her level, my heart breaking at the hope in her voice. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's make this the best butterfly party ever." We spent the next hour transforming our living room into a butterfly garden, and Emma's joy was infectious. But over her head, I caught Sarah watching us with an expression that chilled me. It wasn't anger, it was something much worse. It was the look of someone who had made a decision and was just waiting for the right moment to act on it. That night, after the kids were asleep and the party debris was cleaned up, Sarah sat across from me at our kitchen table. She wasn't crying or yelling, she just looked tired in a way that seemed to go bone deep. "I feel like I'm raising 4 children instead of 3, she said, "and the 4th one is supposed to be my partner." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to explain all the pressures and responsibilities she didn't see. Instead, I found myself really looking at her, really, seeing her, really seeing her, really seeing her. When had she gotten so thin? When had those lines appeared around her eyes? When had my college sweetheart, who used to light up when I walked into a room, started looking at me like I was just another obligation on her endless to-do list? What do you need from me? I asked. She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Finally, she met my eyes. I need you to want to be here, Marcus, not just physically present, but actually here. I need you to choose us, not because you have to, but because we matter more than anything else. I reached across the table for her hand, and she let me take it, but it felt limp in mine. I do choose you, I said. Every day, everything I do, is for this family. Sarah pulled her hand away gently and stood up. That's the problem, she said. You think providing for us is the same thing as loving us. But love isn't just about paychecks and security, Marcus. Love is showing up. Love is being present. Love is making sacrifices that actually cost you something. She paused at the kitchen doorway. I'm going to bed. We can talk more tomorrow. But we didn't talk more tomorrow, or the day after that. The space between us just kept growing wider, and I was too proud and too scared to figure out how to bridge it. I kept thinking I could fix things with grand gestures, flowers, jewelry, weekend getaways. I didn't understand that what Sarah needed was something much simpler and much harder. She needed me to choose her over everything else, consistently, and without reservation. By the time I figured that out, it was already too late. The confrontation came on a Friday night in June, during what should have been a celebration. I'd gotten the promotion to project manager, complete with a substantial raise and the corner office I'd been working toward for 3 years. I'd stopped at the grocery store on my way home, picking up a bottle of champagne and the ingredients for Sarah's favorite pasta dish. I thought we could finally start fresh, that the financial security would ease some of the pressure on our marriage. I found Sarah in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with a piece of paper in her hands. She was writing something in her careful, precise handwriting, the same script I'd fallen in love with when she used to leave me little notes in my textbooks back in college. Great news, I announced, loosening my tie. Peterson offered me the position, 30% salary increase, full benefits package, and sit down, Marcus. Her voice was so calm it stopped me mid-sentence. She didn't look up from her writing. What's that? I asked, nodding toward the paper. A list. She finally met my eyes. A list of what needs to change if we're going to make this marriage work. My stomach dropped. Sarah, what are you talking about? I just got promoted. Things are going to get better now, are they? She stood up, holding the paper like evidence in a trial. Because from where I'm sitting, this promotion just means longer hours, more responsibility, more pressure. It means you'll be even less available than you already are. I sat down heavily on the bed, the champagne bottle still in my hand. That's not fair. I did this for us, for our future. No, Marcus, you did this for you. She began reading from her list. Item 1. No work emails or calls after 7 p.m. or on weekends unless it's a genuine emergency. Item 2. At least 1 full day per week dedicated entirely to family time. No exceptions. Item 3. A real vacation, not a working vacation, where you're on conference calls from the beach, but an actual break where we reconnect as a family. I wanted to interrupt, to explain why each demand was impossible, but something in her posture told me to keep listening. Item 4. Couples therapy. We need professional help to learn how to communicate again. Item 5. I want to go back to school to finish my therapy license. I need your support, not just financially, but emotionally. I need you to believe in my dreams the way I used to believe in yours. She folded the paper and looked at me directly. These aren't suggestions, Marcus. These are requirements. If you can't commit to all of them, then we need to discuss what happens next. The room felt airless. You're giving me an ultimatum. I'm giving us a chance. Her voice wavered for the first time. I'm fighting for our marriage before it's too late. I set the champagne down and tried to process what she was asking. Sarah, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. The Henderson project alone requires stop. She held up her hand. Just stop. Every time I try to talk to you about our relationship, you deflect to work responsibilities. Do you even hear yourself? I'm not deflecting. I'm trying to explain, then explain this. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo from earlier that day. It was Emma's school art show, where she'd won second place for her butterfly painting. In the picture, Emma was holding her ribbon, beaming with pride. Next to her stood Sarah, smiling but with tired eyes. There was an empty space where I should have been standing. She kept looking toward the door. Sarah said quietly. Every few minutes, she'd ask if Daddy was coming. I kept making excuses, but eventually, I ran out of things to say. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I didn't know. You didn't tell me. I shouldn't have to tell you that your daughter's art show is important. I shouldn't have to schedule your love and attention like a business meeting. We stared at each other across what felt like an enormous chasm. 3 years of accumulated hurt and disappointment hung between us like a tangible thing. What happens if I can't meet all your requirements? I asked finally. Sarah's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment I saw the vulnerable woman I'd married, instead of the exhausted, resentful stranger she'd become. Then I think we need to consider whether we're compatible anymore, she whispered, because I can't keep living like this. Marcus, I can't keep feeling like I'm married to someone who sees me as just another item on his to-do list. I reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. I love you, Sarah. I love our family. Everything I do is because I love you. I know you think that's true, she said, and the sadness in her voice broke something inside me. But love isn't just a feeling, Marcus. Love is a choice you make every day. It's showing up, being present, making sacrifices that actually matter. Tell me how to fix this, I said desperately. Tell me what you need. She stood up and walked to our bedroom window, looking out at the backyard where the kids' swing set sat unused in the fading light. I need you to choose us, she said without turning around. Not just in theory, but in practice. I need you to want to be here more than you want to be anywhere else. I need you to fight for our marriage the way you fight for your career. And if I can't, if the job demands, then you'll have to decide what matters more. She turned back to me, and her expression was resolute. Your career or your family, because you can't have both. Not the way you've been trying to do it. I wanted to argue that it wasn't that simple, that she was being unfair, that she didn't understand the complexities of my industry. But looking at her face, really looking at her, I realized that none of those arguments mattered. She wasn't asking for the impossible. She was asking me to prioritize our relationship the way she'd been prioritizing it for years. How long do I have? I asked. I'm not putting a deadline on our marriage, Marcus, but I need to see real changes, not just promises. I need to see that you're willing to fight for us. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept beside me. Her list was on my nightstand, and I kept rereading it by the light of my phone. None of her requests were unreasonable. A marriage counselor would probably say she was being completely fair, but the practical reality felt overwhelming. How could I maintain my new position while limiting my work hours? How could I compete with colleagues who were available 24/7? How could I provide for my family if I didn't give my career everything I had? As dawn approached, I realized I was asking the wrong questions. The real question wasn't how I could balance everything perfectly. The real question was, what was I willing to lose to keep what mattered most? By morning, I'd made my decision. I just wasn't sure it was the right one. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to the inevitable conclusion. But I was too caught up in my own struggles to piece them together. Sarah had grown increasingly distant after our conversation about her ultimatum. I'd tried to meet her halfway, leaving work earlier, putting my phone away during dinner, even scheduling that first couples therapy appointment. But it felt like I was performing rather than changing, and we both knew it. The morning it happened was unremarkable in every way, except that it would become the dividing line between before and after in my life. It was a Tuesday in early August, and I'd left for work feeling cautiously optimistic. Sarah had actually smiled when I kissed her goodbye, and Emma had hugged me extra tight before running off to catch the school bus. Normal family moments that I would replay obsessively in the weeks that followed, searching for clues I'd missed. I was in the middle of a budget meeting when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. We need to talk when you get home. Important. Nothing alarming there. We'd been communicating more, and I assumed it was about weekend plans or maybe her school enrollment for the therapy program. But when I pulled into our driveway at 6:15 p.m., I knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. Sarah's car was gone, which was unusual since she typically waited until after dinner to run errands. The house felt too quiet as I opened the front door, calling out my usual "I'm home" to silence. The first thing I noticed was that Emma's backpack wasn't by the front door where she always dropped it. Jake's toy cars weren't scattered across the living room floor. Lily's high chair wasn't pulled up to the kitchen table. Small absences that together created a deafening void. I found the note on our kitchen counter, written in Sarah's familiar handwriting on a piece of paper torn from one of Emma's school notebooks. My hands shook as I read it. Marcus, I've taken the children to stay with my parents in Ohio. I need time to think about our marriage and what's best for all of us. Please don't try to contact us right now. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. Sarah, I read it 3 times before the words made sense. She'd taken my children and left me a note like I was a roommate she was inconveniencing, not her husband, not their father. I called her immediately, straight to voicemail. I called again, same result. I tried her parents' house number. I had to look up because we rarely talked to them, and her mother answered on the second ring. Hello, Mrs. Patterson, it's Marcus. Is Sarah there? She took the kids. She's here, Marcus, but she doesn't want to talk to you right now. The formal tone in my mother-in-law's voice told me everything I needed to know about the conversations that had already taken place. Can I at least talk to my children? Emma and Jake will be scared. The children are fine. They're adjusting well. Sarah will contact you when she's ready. The line went dead. I stood in my empty kitchen, holding the phone and trying to process what had just happened. My wife had kidnapped our children. There was no other way to describe it. She'd taken them across state lines without my consent, without even a conversation. I called my lawyer, David, to no relation, despite the shared surname. He was a family attorney I'd met through work, and I'd never imagined I'd need his services. She can't just take the kids, I said, pacing through my empty house. This is kidnapping, right? What are my options? David's voice was measured, professional. It's more complicated than that, Marcus. Ohio and California have different laws about parental relocation. Since there's no custody order in place yet, and she's their mother, the police won't treat this as kidnapping. But we need to file for temporary custody immediately. How long will that take? Best case scenario, 2 weeks for a hearing, but given that she's claiming marital problems and has taken them to family, a judge might be sympathetic to her position. 2 weeks, my children would be gone for 2 weeks minimum, maybe longer, while lawyers and judges decided when I could see them again. The injustice of it was staggering. I spent that first night walking through my house like a ghost, touching the remnants of my children's lives. Emma's homework still on the kitchen table, Jake's favorite stuffed dinosaur forgotten on the couch, Lily's sippy cup in the dishwasher. Each item felt like evidence of a crime scene. The paperwork David filed moved through the system with bureaucratic slowness while I lived in a state of suspended animation. I went to work, but I couldn't concentrate. I ate takeout standing over the kitchen sink, unable to bear sitting at our family table alone. I slept fitfully, startling awake at every sound, hoping to hear children's voices that never came. 5 days after Sarah left, she finally called. I answered on the first ring. Marcus. Sarah, thank God. Are the kids okay? Can I talk to them? They're fine. They're adjusting, Sarah. They don't understand what's happening. Emma must be terrified. Emma is doing well. She likes spending time with her grandparents. Jake has been asking some questions, but he's resilient. And Lily is thriving with all the extra attention. The clinical way she described our children's emotional states chilled me. When are you coming home? I'm not sure that I am. The words hit me like a physical blow. What does that mean? It means I'm considering my options. It means maybe this separation is what we both need to figure out what we really want. I know what I want. My voice cracked. I want my family back. I want my children home. Your children are fine, Marcus. They're safe and loved and cared for. They're not just your children, Sarah. I'm their father. Yes, you are. When you remember to be... The accusation was delivered so calmly it took a moment to register. What is that supposed to mean? It means that being a father is more than providing a paycheck. It means showing up, being present, putting your children first, things you've never been particularly good at. I wanted to scream, to rage, to demand she bring my children home immediately. Instead, I tried to keep my voice steady. Let me talk to them, please. Not today. They're still settling in, and I don't want to confuse them. I'm their father. You're a stranger who lives in their house. Marcus, when was the last time you read Emma a bedtime story? When did you last help Jake with his homework? Can you even remember what Lily's favorite song is? Each question was a knife thrust. Not because they were unfair, but because I couldn't answer them immediately. I had to think, to search my memory, and that hesitation was answer enough. I can change, I said quietly. I have been changing, maybe. But I need to protect my children while you figure that out. Her children, not our children. Her children. The call ended with a promise that she'd let me speak with the kids soon, but no definition of what soon meant in her timeline. I hung up and sank into my kitchen chair, surrounded by the silence of a house that had once been filled with laughter and chaos and love. 2 days later, the custody papers arrived via courier. Sarah was filing for temporary custody, claiming I was an absent father who had prioritized career over family. She was requesting supervised visitation only, arguing that the children needed stability during this difficult transition. Reading those legal documents, seeing my marriage and my parenting reduced to cold legalese, I felt something break inside me, not just my heart that had been breaking for months. This was deeper. This was the destruction of my identity as a husband and father, replaced by the clinical language of petitioner and respondent and best interests of the minor children. The woman I'd loved for over a decade, the mother of my children, was now my legal adversary. And she was winning. I called David immediately. How do we fight this? We document everything. We show the court that you're a loving, involved father who's been systematically alienated from his children. But Marcus, I have to be honest, judges tend to favor the status quo. If she can show that children are stable and happy in Ohio, if she can demonstrate a pattern of your absence from their daily lives, ... He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood. Sarah had played this perfectly. She'd documented my failings, created a paper trail of my unavailability, and positioned herself as the protective parent shielding our children from an unreliable father. And the most devastating part was that I couldn't entirely argue with her characterization. I had been absent. I had prioritized work over family moments. I had failed them in ways that mattered more than any promotion or salary increase. But I was still their father, and I was going to fight like hell to prove that. Being an imperfect parent didn't mean I deserved to lose my children entirely. The battle for my family had begun, and I was already losing. Jake nodded solemnly. Mummy cries sometimes when she talks about how lonely she was. The first supervised visit was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at a family services center in Oakland. 3 weeks after Sarah had disappeared with the children. 3 weeks might not sound like long, but when you're used to seeing your kids every day, it feels like an eternity. I arrived 30 minutes early, pacing the parking lot and rehearsing what I'd say to them, how I'd explain why we couldn't go home together. The building was depressing in that institutional way, fluorescent lighting, beige walls, and the kind of furniture designed to be indestructible rather than comfortable. The supervised visitation room had a few toys scattered around, clearly intended for much younger children than Emma and Jake, and a one-way mirror where the quarter-point supervisor could observe our interaction. When they brought my children in, I barely recognized them. Not physically, they looked healthy, maybe even well rested, but there was something different in their eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there before. Emma walked in first, her posture stiff and formal, like she was entering a dentist's office. Jake followed, staying close to his sister, and little Lily clung to the social worker's hand, looking at me like I was a stranger. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to Emma's level. "I've missed you so much." She didn't run to me the way she used to when I came home from work. Instead, she gave me a careful, polite hug, the kind of hug you give to an elderly relative you barely know. "Hi, Daddy," she said, but her voice was different, guarded. Jake was even more reserved. He let me hug him, but he didn't hug back. When I tried to engage him with questions about his favorite dinosaurs, he gave one-word answers and kept glancing toward the door. "Are you having fun at Grandma and Grandpa's house?" I asked, settling cross-legged on the floor so I'd be at their eye level. "Mummy says we're staying there because you couldn't take care of us properly," Emma said matter-of-factly. "She says you were too busy with work to want to be with us." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I looked at my 8-year-old daughter, seeing Sarah's careful coaching in the precise way she delivered that statement. "Emma, that's not true. I love you more than anything in the world. I've been working to take care of our family, but I always want to be with you." "Then why didn't you come to my art show?" she asked, and there was no accusation in her voice, just confused hurt. "Mummy said you had more important things to do." I felt the supervisor's eyes on me through the one. Miro knew that everything I said was being documented for the court. "I made a mistake, sweetheart. I should have been there." "I'm sorry. Mommy says you make a lot of mistakes," Jake piped up. "She says that's why we can't live with you anymore." My hands clenched into fists, but I kept my voice calm. "What else? Has Mommy told you about Daddy?" Emma and Jake exchanged a look, the kind of look that passed between children who'd been coached on what to say and what not to say. "She says you abandoned us," Emma said quietly. "She says you chose your job over being our daddy." The systematic destruction of my relationship with my children was breathtaking in its thoroughness. Sarah had taken 3 weeks to rewrite the narrative of our family, positioning herself as the devoted mother, protecting her children from an absent, uncaring father. Every missed dinner, every work call during family time, every moment when I'd chosen professional obligations over personal ones had been weaponized against me. "I never abandoned you," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I love you. I'm here right now because I love you and I want to see you, but you're only here because the judge said you had to be," Emma replied with devastating 8-year-old logic. "That's what Mummy said." I spent the remaining 45 minutes of that visit trying to connect with my own children, feeling like I was speaking to them through bulletproof glass. They were polite but distant, affectionate but cautious. Every attempt at normal father-child interaction felt stilted and artificial under the supervisor's watchful eye. When the visit ended, Emma gave me another careful hug. "Bye, Daddy. Will we see you again soon?" "I hope so, sweetheart. I love you." "I love you too," she said, but it sounded like something she'd been taught to say rather than something she felt. I walked to my car in a daze, my chest tight with grief and rage. Sarah had taken more than my children. She had taken their trust in me, their understanding of who I was as their father. She'd poisoned their perception of our entire family history. The second visit, 2 weeks later, was even worse. This time, Emma had prepared questions that were clearly not her own. "Daddy, why did you never help Mommy with us when we were babies?" she asked, sitting primly in one of the uncomfortable chairs instead of on the floor where we'd played during the first visit. "I did help, Emma. I changed diapers. I gave bottles. Mommy says you were always at work when we cried at night. She says she had to do everything by herself." The manipulation was so blatant it was almost admirable in its audacity. Sarah was using our children as messengers, delivering accusations disguised as innocent questions. She was teaching them to see our family history through the lens of her victimhood narrative. "Can I show you something?" I asked, pulling out my phone. I'd come prepared this time, with photos and videos from when they were younger. "This is you, Emma, when you were 2 years old. Remember how I used to read you Goodnight Moon every night?" I showed her a video of me reading to her, her tiny voice joining in on the familiar refrains. For a moment, her carefully constructed wariness cracked and I saw a flash of the little girl who used to demand one more story every bedtime. "I don't remember that," she said, but her voice was uncertain now. "And this is Jake learning to ride his bike," I continued, showing them photos of me running alongside him in our driveway, my hand on the back of his seat. "Remember how proud you were when you finally rode all the way to the mailbox by yourself?" Jake studied the photo with fascination, as if he was seeing evidence of an alternate reality. "Mommy says you were never there for important things, but I was there for this important thing, wasn't I?" I asked gently. The children looked confused, trying to reconcile the evidence in front of them with the story they'd been told. I realized I was asking them to choose between their father and their mother, and that was an impossible position for any child. Mommy says people can take fake pictures now, Emma said finally, but she didn't sound convinced. During the third visit, little Lily wouldn't even let me hold her. She clung to the supervisor and cried whenever I approached, as if I was a stranger who might hurt her. My 1-year-old daughter, who used to light up when I came home from work, now looked at me with fear. She doesn't remember you, Emma explained with heartbreaking matter-of-factness. Mummy says babies forget people who aren't around very much. I was around, I said, but even to my own ears it sounded defensive rather than confident. Not really, Jake said. Mommy showed us your schedule. You were at work most of the time. Sarah had weaponized my own calendar against me, showing the children the color-coded blocks that proved I'd prioritized everything else over them. Never mind that those work hours had paid for their house, their clothes, their food, their healthcare. In their young minds, time spent away equaled not caring. The worst moment came during the fourth visit, when Emma brought me a drawing she'd made. It was a family portrait, but I wasn't in it. Just Sarah, Emma, Jake, and Lily, standing in front of a house that looked like her grandparents' place in Ohio. This is our new family, she explained. Mummy says sometimes daddies go away and families have to learn to be happy without them. I stared at that drawing, at my daughter's artistic representation of a world where I simply didn't exist, and felt something fundamental break inside me. This wasn't just custody litigation anymore. This was the systematic erasure of my identity as a father, executed with psychological precision by someone who knew exactly how to hurt me most deeply. Emma, I said carefully, do you remember when we built that blanket fort in the living room during the snowstorm last winter? We pretended we were explorers in Antarctica. She frowned, concentrating. I think so, maybe. You said it was the best day ever because we were all together and couldn't go anywhere else. Mummy says you probably just felt guilty about something and were trying to make up for it, she said, but there was less certainty in her voice now. Realized that Sarah had an answer for every positive memory, a way to reframe every moment of connection as manipulation or guilt. She'd created an alternate history where I was the villain and she was the hero, and my children were living in that false reality. After each visit, I would sit in my car and call David, my lawyer, to debrief what had happened. He would listen to my accounts of the children's coached responses with professional sympathy and growing concern. It's textbook parental alienation, he said after the fourth visit. She's systematically destroying your relationship with your children. The question is whether we can prove it to a judge's satisfaction. They're not my children anymore, I said, watching other families in the parking lot, normal families, where children ran to their parents with joy instead of obligation. They're strangers who happen to share my DNA. Don't say that, Marcus, and don't give up. Alienated children can heal, but only if their targeted parent keeps fighting for them. But as I drove home to my empty house after each devastating visit, I wondered if the damage was already too profound to repair. Sarah had taken my children's love and trust and methodically poisoned it against me. She'd convinced them that I was the source of their family's destruction, that their lives were better without me in them. The cruelest part was that I couldn't even defend myself without putting the children in the middle of an adult conflict. Every time I tried to contradict Sarah's narrative, I risked looking like the kind of father who would badmouth their mother. I was trapped in a no-win situation where silence looked like admission of guilt, but speaking up looked like manipulation. So I endured those monthly supervised visits, watching my children grow more distant with each encounter, feeling like I was attending the funeral of my own fatherhood. And with each polite, careful interaction, I understood more clearly that Sarah hadn't just left me. She'd taken everything that mattered and convinced my own children to help her do it. The turning point came after the sixth supervised visit, when Jake asked me a question that changed everything. Daddy, why did you stop giving Mummy money for groceries? He said, coloring absently with the worn crayons. The visitation center provided. I looked up from the puzzle we'd been working on together. What do you mean, buddy? Mummy says we can't afford good food anymore because you stopped helping us. She says that's why we have to eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner sometimes. The statement hit me like a slap. Jake, I send money to Mummy every month for you and Emma and Lily. A lot of money. But Mummy says, what exactly does Mummy say about money? Emma looked up from her coloring book, suddenly alert to the tension in my voice. She says, you don't care if we have enough to eat. She says you'd rather spend money on yourself than on us. I felt that familiar rage building in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. That's not true, sweetheart. I send Mummy money every 2 weeks to take care of you. More money than we used to spend when we all lived together. The children exchanged one of their careful looks, the kind that had become their default whenever I contradicted something their mother had told them. Can you show us? Emma asked with 8-year-old directness. I pulled out my phone and showed them my banking app. The automatic transfers that sent $3,200 every 2 weeks to Sarah's account. See, this money is for your food, your clothes, everything you need. Jake squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the numbers. That's a lot of money. Yes, it is. Because I love you and I want to make sure you have everything you need. But we don't have everything we need, Emma said, confusion clear in her voice. Mommy says we might have to move out of Grandma's house because she can't afford to pay for our stuff. Something cold settled in my stomach. I was sending Sarah over $6,000 a month in child support, more than most families lived on entirely. If she was claiming poverty, if my children were actually eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner while I was sending enough money to feed a small army, then where was that money going? That night, I called David with a new urgency in my voice. Think Sarah is lying about her financial situation, I said, pacing through my kitchen while I filled him in on the children's comments. She's telling them I'm not supporting them, but I can prove I'm sending thousands of dollars every month. That's interesting, David said, and I could hear him making notes. If she's misrepresenting the financial situation to the children, that could be evidence of parental alienation. But we need to understand what's really happening with that money. What do you mean? I mean, we need to hire a private investigator. If Sarah is claiming financial hardship while receiving substantial support, there might be more to this story than we know. The idea of spying on my ex-wife felt distasteful, but the image of my children eating peanut butter sandwiches while believing I didn't care about their welfare was worse. Do you know someone reliable? David gave me the contact information for Rebecca Martinez, a former police detective who specialized in family law cases. I called her the next morning and arranged to meet at her office in downtown Oakland. Rebecca was not what I'd expected from a private investigator. She was in her 40s, professionally dressed, with the kind of calm competence I associated with good engineers. Her office was sparse but organized, with case files stacked neatly on her desk and a couple of framed certifications on the wall. Tell me about your situation, she said, settling back in her chair with a legal pad. I gave her the overview of the separation, the custody battle, the children's increasingly hostile attitude toward me, and now the financial questions that had emerged during our latest visit. How much are you sending in support? She asked. $6,400 a month. Plus, I'm still paying the mortgage on our family home, the car insurance, and the children's health insurance. All told, probably $8,000 a month. Rebecca raised an eyebrow, and she's claiming poverty. According to my kids, they're barely surviving. Peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, threats of eviction from her parents' house. Either she's lying to them or the money is going somewhere else. It's probably both, Rebecca said matter-of-factly. In my experience, when there's this level of financial deception combined with parental alienation, there are usually other factors at play. Addiction, gambling, another relationship where money is being spent. The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made horrible sense. How do we find out? We start with the basics. Financial surveillance, social media monitoring, maybe some physical surveillance depending on what we discover. The goal is to understand her real situation and document any behavior that contradicts her claims in court. I signed the retainer agreement that afternoon, handing over a check that would have covered 2 weeks of groceries for my children. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was paying someone to investigate why my child support wasn't actually supporting my children. Rebecca's first report arrived by email 3 days later. Just the basic financial surveillance had revealed alarming patterns. Sarah's bank records, which Rebecca had obtained through legal channels, showed regular ATM withdrawals at a casino 40 minutes from her parents' house. Large withdrawals, sometimes $500 or $600 at a time, several times a week. The second report included social media screenshots that made my blood boil. Sarah's Facebook page, which I'd been blocked from seeing, told a very different story than the one she was telling our children. Photos of her at restaurants, at concerts, shopping trips to expensive stores, all while my kids were supposedly surviving on peanut butter sandwiches. But it was the third report that changed everything. Rebecca had conducted 2 days of physical surveillance following Sarah during what should have been routine errands with the children. Instead, she'd documented Sarah dropping the kids off at her parents' house and driving to the Lucky Chances casino, where she'd spent 4 hours gambling away money that was supposed to feed and clothe my children. The photos were damning. Sarah at a blackjack table, chips stacked in front of her. Sarah at a slot machine, clearly comfortable and familiar with the environment. Timestamps showed she'd been there from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, prime time for a mother to be engaged with her children. There's more, Rebecca said when I called her after reading the report. I ran some background checks on her known associates. There's a man named Derek Vaughan who appears in several of her social media posts from before the separation. He has a history of gambling-related debt and 2 DUI convictions. She was seeing someone else. The betrayal cut deep. Even though our marriage had been over 4 months, it looks that way. And if she's in a relationship with someone who has gambling and substance problems, that could explain where your child support money is really going. I sat in my empty house, surrounded by evidence that the woman I'd once loved enough to marry was not only poisoning my children against me but stealing from them to fund her own destructive habits. The children who wouldn't hug me, who looked at me with suspicion and distance, were being neglected by the very parent they'd been taught to see as their protector. What do we do with this information? I asked. We document everything and prepare for court. This level of financial deception, combined with the parental alienation, should be enough to get you substantial custody rights, maybe even primary custody, if we can prove the children are being harmed by her behavior. For the first time since Sarah had left with my children, I felt something other than helpless rage. I felt hope. Not just hope for vindication, but hope that I might actually be able to protect my children from the mother who was supposed to be protecting them. The investigation had given me something more valuable than evidence. It had given me the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. Rebecca handed me her business card as I prepared to leave her office. One more thing, Marcus. Whatever happens in court, don't tell the children about any of this yet. They're not ready to hear that their mother has been lying to them about money. But when the time comes, when they're older and able to understand, this documentation will help them make sense of what really happened during this period of their lives. I pocketed the card and walked out into the Oakland sunshine, feeling like I was emerging from a long, dark tunnel. The fight for my children was far from over, but for the first time, I was fighting with the truth on my side, and that made all the difference. The full scope of Sarah's deception revealed itself gradually, like a photograph developing in slow motion. Rebecca's investigation had opened a door I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through, but my children's welfare depended on understanding the complete truth about what had happened to our family. The gambling addiction explained so much that had confused me during our marriage. Sarah's mood swings that I'd attributed to postpartum depression or parenting stress. Her increasing demands for more household money, claiming groceries and children's expenses were more expensive than I realized. The mysterious credit card charges I'd occasionally questioned, which she'd always explained away with reasonable-sounding excuses. Rebecca's financial analysis painted a devastating picture. Over the 18 months before Sarah left, she had systematically drained our joint savings account with small, frequent withdrawals. $20 here, $50 there, amounts small enough that they wouldn't trigger alerts from our bank, but which added up to over $12,000 in missing money. She was funding her gambling habit with your family's security, Rebecca explained during our follow-up meeting. The pattern is classic: start small, increase gradually, always staying just below the threshold that would raise immediate red flags. But the financial theft was only part of the story. The deeper Rebecca dug, the more complex Sarah's web of deception became. Bank records showed she'd opened credit cards in both our names without telling me, running up debt that I was legally responsible for. She'd borrowed money from her parents, her sister, even some of our mutual friends, claiming I was being financially controlling and refusing to pay for necessities. She's been building a narrative for months, maybe years, Rebecca said, spreading documents across her desk like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. To everyone in her life, you're the villain, the absent husband who doesn't provide for his family. Meanwhile, she's been stealing from that same family to fund her addiction. The most damaging discovery came when Rebecca accessed Sarah's phone records through legal channels. Text messages between Sarah and her gambling partner, Derek Vaughan, revealed not just an affair, but a partnership in financial manipulation that had started long before she left me. Look at this, Rebecca said, showing me printed screenshots of their conversations. This is from 3 months before she left. The messages were stomach-turning. Derek, how much did you get today? Sarah, only $200. He's getting suspicious about the grocery money. Derek, time to escalate. Kids need clothes, school stuff. He can't argue with that. Sarah already tried. Maybe I should just leave him. Take the kids and go for full support. Derek, smart. Courts always side with the mum, especially if you can prove he's neglectful. Sarah, working on it, documenting everything. I read through months of these exchanges, watching my marriage dissolve in real time through text messages I'd never known existed. Sarah and Derek had been strategizing my destruction, planning how to position her as the victim and me as the villain. They'd discussed which of my work trips to highlight, which missed family events to emphasize, how to frame my dedication to providing for my family as abandonment. This is premeditated, I said, my hands shaking as I held the evidence of my wife's betrayal. She didn't leave because our marriage was failing. She left because she'd already planned to take everything. It gets worse, Rebecca said gently. The custody battle isn't just about your children. It's about maximizing her child support income to fund both her gambling and this relationship with Derek. Rebecca showed me financial projections. Sarah had researched calculations of how much child support she could expect based on my income, how long alimony payments might last, what percentage of my assets she could claim in the divorce. It was all there in black and white, a business plan. Too affording my life, but the cruelest revelation was still to come. Rebecca had obtained recordings of Sarah's conversations with the children during the weeks after she'd taken them to Ohio. Not content with simply removing them from my life, Sarah had spent hours programming them with her version of events. Listen to this, Rebecca said, playing an audio file on her computer. This was recorded 3 days after she arrived at her parents' house. Sarah's voice came through the speakers, patient and methodical. Emma, what do you remember about Daddy's job? He worked a lot, came Emma's small voice. That's right. And what did that mean for our family? He wasn't home very much. And how did that make Mummy feel sad and lonely? Very good. Now when people ask you about Daddy, what should you tell them? That he was always working and didn't want to spend time with us. And why did Mummy have to bring you to Grandma's house? Because Daddy abandoned us. I had to stop the recording. Hearing my 8-year-old daughter being coached to hate me was more than I could bear. This wasn't just parental alienation, it was psychological abuse, systematic and deliberate. There are hours of these recordings, Rebecca said softly. She's been programming them like a cult leader programs followers. Repetition, emotional, manipulation, rewriting history. How is this legal? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's not. This is grounds for emergency custody intervention, possibly criminal charges. No judge who hears these recordings will allow this to continue. Rebecca continued gathering evidence while I struggled to process the magnitude of Sarah's betrayal. Credit card statements showed charges at expensive restaurants and hotels during times when she'd told the children they couldn't afford proper food. Surveillance photos captured her at the casino while claiming to potential babysitters that she couldn't afford childcare. The most heartbreaking discovery came when Rebecca interviewed the children's teachers and daycare providers. Emma's teacher reported that Emma had become withdrawn and anxious, frequently asking if her family was poor and if they'd have to live on the streets. Jake's preschool teacher noted that he'd started hoarding snacks, apparently convinced that food was scarce at home. Your children are being traumatized, Rebecca said bluntly, not just by the separation from you, but by the constant messaging that their family is in crisis because their father doesn't care about them. Meanwhile, financial records showed that Sarah was spending more money per month than most families earned. The casino losses alone averaged $2,000 weekly, money that should have been feeding and clothing my children. Add in Derek's expenses, restaurant meals, shopping trips, and luxury purchases, and it became clear that Sarah was living extravagantly while teaching my children to fear poverty. She's stolen their sense of security, I realized. They think they're poor and abandoned, but she's spending money like there's no tomorrow. It's a classic manipulation tactic, Rebecca explained. Keep the victims feeling vulnerable and dependent, while the abuser maintains complete control of the resources. Your children think they need her protection from poverty, but she's the one creating the illusion of poverty. The investigation revealed one final, devastating truth. Sarah had been planning this for over a year. Bank records showed she'd been secretly moving money to accounts I didn't know about, building a war chest for the custody battle. She'd consulted with multiple lawyers before ever mentioning marriage problems to me, shopping for one who would maximize her financial gain. Email records subpoenaed from her various accounts showed communications with attorneys, financial advisors, even a publicist who specialized in reputation management for high-conflict divorces. She'd been building a case against me while still sharing my bed, still accepting my financial support, still allowing me to believe we were working through our problems together. This wasn't a marriage that failed, I said, staring at the mountain of evidence Rebecca had compiled. This was a long con that ran its course. That's exactly what it was, Rebecca agreed. And your children are the collateral damage. As we prepared for the emergency custody hearing, I felt a mixture of rage and heartbreak that threatened to consume me. Sarah hadn't just destroyed our marriage, she'd weaponized our children's love and trust, turning them into soldiers in her war against me. She'd stolen their financial security to fund her own destructive habits, then convinced them that I was the reason for their suffering. But now I had the truth. And in family court, the truth still mattered. The evidence Rebecca had gathered was damning enough to change everything. Sarah's house of lies was about to collapse, and when it did, I would be there to protect my children from the wreckage. The only question was whether I could repair the damage she'd done to their hearts in time to save our relationship as father and children. Some betrayals cut so deep that healing seems impossible. But for my children's sake, I had to try. Derek Vaughan wasn't hard to research once Rebecca had his name. A quick background check revealed a man with a pattern of financial instability and relationship manipulation that made my blood run cold. 2 bankruptcies, 3 DUI convictions, and a trail of ex-girlfriends who'd filed restraining orders citing financial abuse and emotional manipulation. What made it worse was realizing how long he'd been in our lives without my knowledge. Rebecca's investigation showed that Derek and Sarah had met at the Lucky Chances casino nearly 2 years before she left, me meaning their relationship had been developing throughout our marriage counseling sessions, throughout her ultimatums about my work schedule, throughout her tearful pleas for me to prioritize our family. The restaurant receipt that confirmed their affair was dated just 3 days after Sarah had given me her list of requirements for saving our marriage. While I was struggling to balance work demands with her emotional needs, she was having intimate dinners with another man, planning our family's destruction. Look at this, Rebecca said, showing me photographs from Derek's social media accounts. These were posted during the period when Sarah was telling you she needed space to think about your marriage. The photos showed Derek and Sarah at a wine bar in San Francisco, at a Giants game, at a weekend getaway in Napa Valley. In every image, Sarah looked relaxed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. While she was portraying herself to me as a struggling mother barely holding our family together, she was living a completely different life with Derek. She was running two separate relationships, I said, studying the photos with a mixture of fascination and disgust. Two separate versions of herself. It's textbook behavior for someone with gambling addiction, Rebecca explained. The addiction requires constant financial resources, so they maintain multiple relationships and income streams. Derek was probably her gambling partner and enabler, while you were the financial provider. The deeper we dug into Derek's background, the more disturbing the picture became. His ex-girlfriend from 2 years prior had filed a police report claiming he'd stolen her credit cards to fund gambling debts. Another ex had accused him of emotional manipulation and financial abuse patterns that sounded sickeningly familiar when compared to what Sarah had been doing to me. He's done this before, I realized. This exact same scenario. Multiple times, Rebecca confirmed. Derek targets women with access to money or financial stability. He introduces them to gambling, gets them addicted, then helps them manipulate their existing relationships to maximize income. Rebecca showed me financial records that revealed the true scope of their partnership. Derek had been present for many of Sarah's casino visits, often gambling at the same tables. Credit card records showed they'd taken gambling trips to Las Vegas and Reno using money from my child support payments, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even couple spa treatments all funded by money intended to care for my children. Your wife became his business partner, Rebecca said bluntly. You were the mark, and your children were leveraged to ensure ongoing income. The most nauseating discovery came when Rebecca obtained Derek's financial records through legal channels. He'd been receiving regular payments from Sarah throughout their relationship, not gifts or loans, but structured payments that looked suspiciously like profit sharing from a successful con game. She's been paying him, I said, staring at the bank transfers. Paying him with money I sent for the children. It looks like he gets a percentage of everything: child support, asset liquidation, even money borrowed from her family. It's a professional operation. Rebecca had also uncovered communications between Derek and other women during the same period he was involved with Sarah. Dating app messages, social media flirtations, even email exchanges with what appeared to be other ongoing relationships. Derek wasn't just manipulating Sarah, he was running multiple cons simultaneously. Does Sarah know about the other women? I asked. Based on the evidence, probably not. Derek is skilled at compartmentalizing his relationships. Each woman probably thinks she's his only victim. This revelation added another layer of tragedy to an already complex situation. Sarah wasn't just the villain in our story, she was also Derek's victim. Her gambling addiction, her manipulation of our children, her systematic destruction of our marriage had all been orchestrated by someone who was simultaneously betraying her with other women, but victimhood didn't excuse what she'd done to our children. Rebecca showed me recordings of phone calls between Derek and Sarah where they discussed strategy for the custody battle. Derek coached her on what to tell the children, how to document my supposed failings as a father, even how to time her emotional breakdowns for maximum impact during supervised visits. She needs to cry more during the handoffs, Derek said in one recorded conversation. The social worker is documenting everything, and grief plays better than anger. I can't force tears, Sarah replied. Think about what you're losing. Think about how he's trying to control you through the courts. The emotion will come naturally. Sometimes I feel bad about what we're doing to the kids. The kids will be fine. They're resilient. But if we don't maximize this opportunity, you'll be stuck in poverty forever. Listening to them strategize about manipulating my children's emotions was devastating. But it also revealed something important. Derek saw our family as nothing more than a revenue stream. The children he was helping Sarah alienate from me were just tools to ensure ongoing income. Rebecca's investigation revealed that Derek had been present during some of Sarah's supervised visits with the children, coaching her from the parking lot on what to say and how to behave. He'd been the invisible hand guiding the destruction of my relationship with my kids, treating their emotional well-being as collateral damage in his financial scheme. He's turned your children into commodities, Rebecca said. The more alienated they become from you, the more secure his income stream becomes. The evidence showed that Derek had been researching my professional background, my salary potential, even my family's financial resources. He knew exactly how much money was at stake in the custody battle and had helped Sarah position herself to claim the maximum possible support. But Derek had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated how thoroughly modern financial transactions are documented. Every casino visit, every hotel stay, every restaurant meal was traceable through credit cards and bank records. His attempt to stay in the shadows while orchestrating our family's destruction had failed, because money always leaves a paper trail. Have enough evidence to prove conspiracy, Rebecca said, organizing the documentation into neat folders. This wasn't just adultery or even simple financial abuse. This was a coordinated effort to defraud you and psychologically abuse your children. The most damning evidence came from Derek's own financial records. During the period when Sarah was claiming to the court that she needed increased support because the children were struggling financially. Derek had been making luxury purchases with money that was clearly connected to the child support payments: a new motorcycle, expensive electronics, even a down payment on a condo, all funded while my children were supposedly eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. "He's been living off your children's support money," I said, feeling sick to my stomach. "Worse than that," Rebecca replied. "He's been encouraging Sarah to make the children's lives more difficult to justify increased support requests. The poverty they're experiencing isn't real, it's manufactured to create evidence for court." As we prepared for the emergency custody hearing, I struggled with how to feel about Sarah. She had betrayed me, manipulated our children, and stolen money intended for their care. But she'd also been manipulated by someone with a history of financial and emotional abuse. Derek had exploited her vulnerabilities and turned her into an accomplice in destroying our family. "The tragedy is that Sarah probably started as Derek's victim," Rebecca observed, "but at some point, she became a willing participant in victimizing her own children. That distinction mattered for legal purposes, but it didn't change the damage done to Emma, Jake, and Lily. Whether Sarah was Derek's victim or partner, our children had suffered psychological abuse designed to maximize someone else's profit." The evidence Rebecca had gathered painted a picture of systematic exploitation that went far beyond a failed marriage. This was a criminal enterprise that had used my children's welfare as leverage for financial gain. And now it was time to expose the truth and fight for my family's future. Derek Vaughan had made a career out of destroying families for profit. But this time, he'd picked the wrong family to target. This time, his victims had the resources and determination to fight back. This time, the truth was going to win. David's law office felt different when I arrived with 3 bankers' boxes full of evidence. What had started as a standard custody dispute had evolved into something that resembled a federal investigation. Rebecca had organized everything meticulously: records, surveillance photos, audio recordings, communication logs, all documenting the systematic destruction of my family. "This is extraordinary," David said, reviewing Rebecca's executive summary. "In 20 years of family law, I've never seen documentation this comprehensive. Sarah and Derek essentially provided us with a roadmap of their entire operation. We spent the morning organizing our legal strategy. The evidence was overwhelming, but family court required careful presentation to avoid overwhelming the judge with information. David wanted to focus on 3 core arguments: financial fraud, parental alienation, and child endangerment. "The recordings of Sarah coaching the children are our strongest evidence," he explained. "No judge can listen to those conversations and allow the current custody arrangement to continue." But building a legal case was only part of the challenge. I also had to prepare myself emotionally for what was coming. The emergency hearing would likely result in the children being removed from Sarah's custody and returned to me, a victory that would also be traumatic for kids who'd been programmed to see me as the villain in their story. "They're going to be confused and possibly resistant," David warned. "Sarah has convinced them that you're dangerous and that she's protecting them from you. When they're forced to come home, they might not understand that it's actually protection from her." I'd been thinking about this constantly since Rebecca's investigation had revealed the full scope of Sarah's manipulation. My children would need therapy, patience, and enormous amounts of love to undo the psychological damage that had been inflicted on them. Winning custody was just the beginning of a much longer healing process. Rebecca had prepared video presentations of the evidence that would make Sarah's deception undeniable: surveillance footage of her gambling while claiming poverty, audio recordings of her coaching the children to hate me, financial documentation showing luxury purchases made with child support money while telling the kids they couldn't afford basic necessities. "The key is showing pattern and intent," Rebecca explained during our final preparation meeting. "This wasn't a struggling mother making poor decisions. This was a calculated campaign of psychological abuse and financial fraud." We'd also prepared responses to the inevitable counterarguments Sarah's lawyer would make. She would claim that my work schedule proved I was an absent father. She would argue that the children were thriving in Ohio and shouldn't be disrupted. She would paint herself as a victim of my emotional neglect who'd made mistakes while trying to survive. "Every argument she makes is contradicted by the evidence," David said confidently. "She can't claim the children are thriving when we have recordings of her programming them to fear and hate their father. She can't claim poverty when the financial records show extravagant spending." The most challenging aspect of building our case was determining how much to reveal about Derek's involvement. While his manipulation of Sarah provided context for her behavior, the focus needed to remain on protecting the children rather than prosecuting crimes. "We're not trying to destroy Sarah," David reminded me. "We're trying to protect your children and restore your relationship with them. The criminal aspects can be addressed separately if necessary, but the evidence of Derek's involvement was too significant to ignore entirely." Rebecca had documented that he'd been present during some of the children's visits with Sarah, effectively participating in their psychological manipulation. His financial benefit from the child support fraud made him an active conspirator rather than just Sarah's romantic partner. Derek has been coaching this entire operation, I said, reviewing the communication logs. Sarah's sudden competence at legal strategy, her systematic approach to alienating the children, even her ability to manipulate the supervised visitation process, none of that matches her personality or skills, which is why we need to address his role without making him the primary focus, David replied. The judge needs to understand that Sarah isn't acting alone, that there's someone actively encouraging her destructive behavior. We'd also gathered character witnesses who could testify about my relationship with the children before Sarah's campaign of alienation began. Emma's former teacher, who remembered me volunteering for school events, Jake's pediatrician, who'd observed our close bond during medical appointments, even Sarah's own sister, who'd become suspicious of Derek's influence and was willing to testify about changes in Sarah's behavior. The contrast between before and after will be powerful, David explained. We'll show the court who you were as a father before the manipulation began, and who you're fighting to be again. Rebecca had also documented the impact of Sarah's behavior on the children themselves. School records showed declining academic performance and increased behavioral problems. Medical records indicated stress-related symptoms that had developed since the separation. Even photos from before and after the alienation campaign showed visible changes in their body language and facial expressions. Your children are victims, too, Rebecca reminded me. The evidence shows they're suffering psychological harm from being used as weapons in this custody battle. As we finalized our preparation, I struggled with the knowledge that exposing the truth would likely destroy any remaining possibility of Sarah and me co-parenting successfully. The evidence we'd gathered painted her as either a calculating manipulator or someone so thoroughly manipulated herself that she'd lost the ability to protect our children's well-being. There's no going back from this, I said to David during our final meeting before the hearing. Once we present this evidence, Sarah and I will be enemies forever. You're already enemies, he replied bluntly. She made that choice when she decided to use your children as weapons. Your job now is to protect them, not to preserve a relationship with someone who's proven she'll harm them to get what she wants. The night before the emergency hearing, I sat in my empty house and made audio recordings for each of my children. Not legal evidence, but personal messages explaining why I'd had to fight for them, how much I loved them, and how sorry I was for everything they'd been through. Emma, sweetheart, I said into my phone's recorder, by the time you hear this, you'll know the truth about why Mommy took you away from me. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you, never stopped fighting for you, and never stopped believing that someday we'd be a family again. Similar messages for Jake and Lily. Words I hoped would help them understand the choices I've been forced to make to protect them. Even if they hated me initially for disrupting their life with Sarah, someday they'd be old enough to understand why it had been necessary. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. The legal strategy was sound. The expert witnesses were prepared. Rebecca had even arranged for child psychologists to be available immediately after the hearing to help with the children's transition back to my custody. We're as ready as we can be, David said as we loaded the evidence boxes into his car. Tomorrow, we get your children back. But as I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that winning this battle might cost me the war. Sarah's manipulation had been so thorough, so psychologically sophisticated that my children might never forgive me for exposing her. The evidence would prove I was right. The judge would rule in my favor. Justice would be served. The question was whether my children would ever trust me enough to let me be their father again tomorrow. I would find out if love could overcome the poison that had been injected into their hearts. Tomorrow I would learn whether the truth was powerful enough to heal the damage that lies had done to our family. Tomorrow, everything would change. I just prayed it would change for the better. The call came from Emma's school counselor on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before our emergency custody hearing. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice was gentle, but concerned as she explained why she was reaching out. Mr. Chen, I'm calling because Emma has been having some difficulties at school. She's been withdrawn, anxious, and yesterday she had what we would classify as a panic attack during recess. My heart clenched. What happened? Another student mentioned that her father was picking her up early for a dentist appointment, and Emma became hysterical. She kept saying that her daddy had abandoned her and would never come to school. It took us 20 minutes to calm her down. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of Sarah's manipulation settling like lead in my stomach. What did you tell her? We assured her that she was safe and that her family situation was temporary. But Mr. Chen, I have to ask, Emma seems to believe that you've chosen not to see her. She's been telling other children that her father doesn't love her anymore. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Mrs. Rodriguez describing changes in Emma's behavior that broke my heart. My confident, outgoing 8-year-old had become fearful and clingy. She'd stopped participating in class discussions, stopped playing with friends during recess, and had begun hoarding snacks in her desk because she was afraid there wouldn't be enough food at home. Has she mentioned anything about their living situation? I asked carefully, not wanting to influence Mrs. Rodriguez's observations but desperate for information about my children's well-being. She's mentioned that money is tight and that her mother is stressed about bills. Emma seems to carry a lot of worry about adult concerns that no 8-year-old should have to think about. After hanging up with the school, I immediately called Rebecca to share this new information. Emma's school-based trauma would be crucial evidence for our custody case. But more importantly, it confirmed my worst fears about what Sarah's manipulation was doing to my children's psychological health. "We need to document this," Rebecca said immediately. "Can you get a written statement from the school counselor about Emma's behavioral changes?" I'll ask. "But, Rebecca, this isn't just about evidence anymore. My daughter is having panic attacks because she believes I've abandoned her. How long can children survive this kind of psychological trauma?" Rebecca's silence was answer enough. We both knew that the damage being done to my children went far beyond the custody battle. It was creating wounds that might never fully heal. That afternoon, I received another call, this time from Jake's preschool teacher, Miss Chunigan. No relation had observed similar changes in my 6-year-old son. "Jake has been having nightmares during nap time," she explained. "He talks in his sleep, and yesterday he kept saying Daddy doesn't want us anymore." When I asked him about it, he told me that his mummy explained why they had to move away. What exactly did he say? He said that daddies sometimes get tired of their families and decide they don't want to take care of them anymore. He seems to think this is a normal thing that happens to children. The systematic nature of Sarah's psychological abuse was becoming clearer with each conversation. She hadn't just told the children that I'd abandoned them, she'd normalized abandonment, making them believe that fathers routinely discard their families when they become inconvenient. Miss Chen continued. "Jake has also been acting out during playtime, particularly when other children mention their fathers. Yesterday he told another boy that having a daddy is just pretend, and that all fathers eventually leave." I found myself taking notes, documenting my children's trauma for legal purposes while simultaneously feeling like each detail was a knife wound to my heart. My son had been taught that fatherhood itself was a lie, that the love I'd shown him for 6 years was meaningless. The most devastating call came from Lily's daycare provider at barely 2 years old. Lily couldn't articulate her confusion, but her behavior told the story clearly enough. "She's been having severe separation anxiety whenever her mother leaves," the daycare director explained. "She screams and clings, which is unusual for her age group after this much time. But what's really concerning is her reaction to male caregivers." "What kind of reaction?" "She becomes agitated and fearful whenever our male teacher tries to interact. With her, she used to love playing with Mr. James, but now she runs away and cries if he approaches." Sarah had managed to poison even my youngest child against the very concept of male authority figures. Lily, who used to light up when I came home from work, had been taught to fear men who might represent her father. "We're wondering if there's been some trauma involving a male figure in her life," the director said carefully. "Her behavior suggests she's been taught that men are dangerous." I couldn't bring myself to explain that the trauma was systematic brainwashing designed to ensure that Lily would reject me if we were ever reunited. Instead, I thanked her for the information and added another page to the growing documentation of my children's suffering. Rebecca arranged for child psychologists to review the school reports and provide expert opinions for our court case. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a specialist in parental alienation, agreed to review the evidence and testify about the psychological impact on the children. "This is severe," Dr. Martinez said after reviewing the school reports and Rebecca's recordings. "The children are displaying classic symptoms of psychological abuse. Emma's panic attacks, Jake's nightmares, Lily's fear of male authority figures. These are trauma responses." "Is it reversible?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "With proper intervention, yes. But the longer this continues, the more difficult it becomes to repair. Children's brains are still developing, and prolonged exposure to this kind of manipulation can create lasting changes in how they form attachments and trust relationships." Dr. Martinez explained that Sarah's systematic approach to alienation was particularly damaging because it combined emotional manipulation with manufactured evidence of abandonment. "It's not enough for her to tell them you don't love them," Dr. Martinez said. "She's created an environment where they experience daily proof of your abandonment's phone calls that were never scheduled, promised visits that were never arranged, financial hardship that's blamed on your neglect." The children were living in a carefully constructed false reality, where every day confirmed their mother's narrative about my failure as a father. They weren't just being told lies, they were experiencing what felt like evidence that the lies were true. "The most insidious aspect," Dr. Martinez continued, "is that she's teaching them to reject love itself. When children are taught that their father's love was fake or conditional, they often develop defense mechanisms that make it difficult to accept love from anyone." This psychological analysis added urgency to our legal strategy. We weren't just fighting for custody, we were racing against time to prevent permanent damage to my children's ability to form healthy relationships. Rebecca had also gathered evidence about the children's living situation in Ohio that painted a disturbing picture. While Sarah claimed they were thriving with their grandparents, the reality was more complex. The children were sleeping in a single room, had limited access to their toys and belongings, and were experiencing significant disruption to their routines. They've been essentially refugees in their own family, Rebecca observed. Displaced from their home, separated from their friends, living in uncertainty about their future. The school reports revealed additional concerns about the children's academic and social development. Emma's grades had dropped significantly, and she'd stopped participating in activities she once enjoyed. Jake had become aggressive with other children, particularly during games that involved families or fathers. Emma asked me yesterday if poor children are allowed to go to college. Mrs. Rodriguez had written in her formal statement to the court, she seems to believe that her family's financial situation has changed dramatically, and that her future opportunities are limited. While Sarah was spending thousands of dollars per month on gambling and luxury purchases, she'd convinced an aunt that poverty would prevent her from pursuing higher education. The psychological cruelty was breathtaking as I compiled all this evidence of my children's suffering. I struggled with guilt over the role my work focus had played in creating vulnerabilities that Sarah had exploited. If I'd been more present, more attentive to the warning signs, could I have prevented this systematic abuse? You can't blame yourself, Dr. Martinez said when I shared these concerns. Parental alienation typically targets the parent who provides stability and resources. Your work ethic didn't cause this, it made you a target for someone who saw opportunity in manipulating your commitment to providing for your family. The evidence we'd gathered painted a clear picture. My children were victims of psychological abuse designed to maximize Sarah's financial gain while ensuring their ongoing alienation from me. They were suffering trauma that would require years of therapy to address, and every day the abuse continued made their healing more difficult. But within all this documentation of pain and manipulation, there were also small signs of hope. Emma, teacher, noted that she still drew pictures of her old house with 4 family members. Jake occasionally mentioned missing his toys in his bedroom. Even Lily sometimes said "Dada" when she was particularly upset. Somewhere beneath the layers of programmed hatred and manufactured fear, my children still existed. The question was whether love and truth would be powerful enough to reach them before the damage became irreversible. The emergency custody hearing was 2 days away. Soon, I would have the chance to fight for my children's freedom from this psychological prison. I just prayed that when I won them back, there would be enough of their original selves left to rebuild our relationship as father and children. The first unexpected ally appeared at my doorstep on a Wednesday evening, just 2 days before the emergency custody hearing. When I opened the door, I found Sandra Patterson, Sarah's mother, standing on my porch with a manila envelope in her hands and tears in her eyes. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly. "May I come in?" I hadn't spoken to my former mother-in-law since the day Sarah left with the children. Sandra had always been polite but distant during our marriage, and I'd assumed she supported her daughter's version of events completely. Seeing her at my door was so unexpected that I almost wondered if I was hallucinating. "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let her enter. Sandra looked around the living room, still decorated with family photos and the children's artwork, and her composure cracked slightly. "I've been watching those babies for 3 months now," she said, settling into the chair where Sarah used to read bedtime stories. "And I can't stay quiet anymore about what I've been seeing." She handed me the envelope with shaking hands. "Sarah doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I've gone to the grocery store, but I needed you to have this before your court hearing." Inside the envelope were handwritten letters, dozens of them, written by Emma, Jake, and even little Lily in her toddler scroll. Letters addressed to me that I'd never received. "Dear Daddy," Emma's first letter began, "I miss you so much. Mummy says you don't want to see us anymore, but I don't understand why. Did I do something wrong? I've been very good. Please come get us soon." My hands trembled as I read through Jake's letters. "Daddy, I drew you a picture of our house. Mummy says we can't go home, but I want to show you my dinosaur collection. Are you mad at me?" Even Lily had written letters, mostly scribbles with Sandra's helpful translations. "This says Dada, and this is a heart." "She's been intercepting everything," Sandra said, watching me read. "The children write to you constantly, and Sarah, it takes the letters and throws them away. They ask about you every day, Marcus, every single day." The letters spanned the entire 3 months since Sarah had taken them. In the early ones, the children expressed confusion and hope. As time progressed, their tone became more resigned and sad. The most recent letters showed the effects of Sarah's systematic programming. "Mommy says you have a new family now," Emma had written just 2 weeks earlier. "I understand why you don't want us anymore. We're too much work and cost too much money." "These children are dying inside," Sandra said, her voice breaking. "They cry themselves to sleep asking for their daddy. But every time they express love for you, Sarah corrects them. She tells them they're confused, that they don't really miss you." Sandra opened her purse and pulled out her phone. "I've been recording some of their conversations with Sarah. I know it's wrong to spy on my own daughter, but what she's doing to those babies is worse." She played an audio file of Sarah talking to Emma. "Remember, sweetheart, Daddy chose his job over us. He could come see you if he really wanted to, but he doesn't care enough to make the effort." "But the lady at the visit said Daddy wants to see us more," Emma's voice responded. "The lady doesn't know Daddy like I do. If he really loved you, he would have fought harder to keep us from leaving." But maybe, no maybes, Emma, Daddy abandoned us. The sooner you accept that, the less it will hurt. I listened to several more recordings, each one documenting Sarah's patient, methodical destruction of the children's love for me. But what struck me most was Sandra's commentary between the files. At first I believed her. Sandra admitted, Sarah can be very convincing when she wants to be. She told us you were controlling, that you'd threatened to take the children away from her, that you'd been emotionally abusive. What changed your mind? The money, Sandra said bluntly. Sarah claimed you weren't supporting them, that they were struggling financially. But I see the bank statements, Marcus. I know how much you're sending, and I see what she's spending it on. Sandra pulled out printed bank records of evidence she'd been gathering secretly for weeks. Casino charges, expensive restaurants, shopping trips when she claims they can't afford groceries. Meanwhile, I'm the one buying the children's clothes and school supplies because she says there's no money. She showed me receipts for hundreds of dollars in purchases she'd made for my children, items that should have been covered by the support I was sending. Emma needed new shoes for school, and Sarah said you refused to pay for them. But I checked the bank records that night and saw a $300 casino charge on the same day. Why didn't you confront her? I tried. She has an answer for everything. The casino charges are stress relief because of the trauma you've caused. The restaurant bills are necessary because she's too depressed to cook. Every luxury purchase is justified as essential for her mental health. Sandra's decision to reach out had been triggered by something she'd witnessed the previous weekend. Sarah was on the phone with that Derek person, laughing and making plans for a weekend trip to Lake Tahoe. Meanwhile, Emma was in the next room, crying because she thought they were too poor to afford birthday presents for her upcoming party. The cruelest irony was that Sarah was planning to spend more on one weekend trip than Emma's entire birthday would cost. While programming the children to fear poverty, she was living extravagantly on money intended for their care. The final straw was yesterday, Sandra continued. Jake asked if he could call you for Father's Day. Sarah told him that you'd moved away and changed your phone number, that there was no way to reach you anymore. But you know that's not true. Of course it's not true. I have your number. I know where you live. But she's telling these children that you've disappeared from their lives by choice. Sandra had brought something else in her purse, a cell phone she'd bought specifically for secret communication. I want you to be able to talk to the children when Sarah isn't around. I can't undo the damage she's done, but I can at least let them hear your voice. The phone contained video messages the children had recorded for me, not knowing their grandmother planned to deliver them. Emma singing a song she'd learned at summer camp. Jake showing off a drawing he'd made of our family. Lily saying dada and blowing kisses at the camera. They love you, Marcus, Sandra said firmly. Whatever Sarah has told them, whatever programming she's done, they still love you. They're just scared and confused. Sandra's support meant more than just moral validation. Provided crucial evidence for the custody hearing. She was willing to testify about Sarah's financial deception, the children's emotional state, and the systematic nature of the parental alienation. I've failed those children by staying quiet this long, she said. I was afraid of losing access to them if I opposed Sarah, but I realized now that my silence was enabling their abuse. Before she left, Sandra shared one more piece of information that would prove crucial. Sarah's planning to disappear again after the custody hearing. She and Derek have been looking at apartments in Nevada, somewhere you won't be able to find them easily. This intelligence allowed David to request additional security measures for the custody hearing, ensuring that Sarah couldn't flee with the children if the ruling went against her. Thank you, I said as Sandra prepared to leave. For the evidence, for the truth, for caring about the children's well-being more than family loyalty. Those babies are my grandchildren, she replied. They deserve better than what they're getting. They deserve their father. The next unexpected ally came from an even more surprising source, Emma's second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who reached out through the school counselor to offer testimony about the changes she'd observed in Emma's behavior and academic performance. I've been teaching for 15 years, she wrote in her statement to the court. I've seen children go through difficult divorces before. What's happening to Emma is different. This isn't normal adjustment stress, this is systematic psychological damage. Even Jake's preschool teacher and Lily's daycare providers volunteered to testify about the behavioral changes they'd witnessed. Without any prompting from me, these education professionals had recognized signs of psychological abuse and were willing to speak up for my children's welfare. The support from unexpected allies gave me hope that the truth was powerful enough to overcome Sarah's manipulation. People who'd observed my children firsthand could see through the lies and recognize genuine suffering when they witnessed it. As I prepared for the custody hearing with Sandra's evidence and the educators' testimonies, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: confidence that justice would prevail. My children had advocates. They didn't even know about people who'd witnessed their pain and were brave enough to speak the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Sometimes the most powerful allies are the ones who have nothing to gain except the satisfaction of protecting innocent children from harm. The night before the emergency custody hearing, I found myself in the emergency room at Oakland General Hospital. The irony wasn't lost on me after months of fighting for my children's emotional well-being. My own body had finally rebelled against the sustained stress and pressure. It started during my final preparation meeting with David. We were reviewing Sandra's testimony when I felt a crushing pain in my chest radiating down my left arm. For a terrifying moment, I thought I was having a heart attack at 34 years old. "Marcus, you need to sit down," David said, looking alarmed at whatever he saw in my face. "I'm fine," I insisted, but the room was spinning and my vision had started to tunnel. "You're not fine. I'm calling an ambulance." The next few hours were a blur of medical tests and concerned faces. The emergency room doctor, Dr. Jennifer Kim, ran every cardiac test available before finally diagnosing me with an acute stress reaction that had triggered symptoms mimicking a heart attack. "Your body is essentially in a state of constant fight," she explained, reviewing my test results. "The prolonged stress has pushed your cardiovascular system to a breaking point. You're having what we call a cardiac stress response. But I'm okay. I can go to court tomorrow." Dr. Kim looked at me with the kind of concern usually reserved for patients who weren't taking their diagnosis seriously. "Mr. Chen, you're 34 years old and you just experienced chest pain severe enough to warrant emergency treatment. This isn't something you push through." "You don't understand," I said, probably sounding more desperate than I intended. "Tomorrow I get my children back. I've been fighting for them for months. I can't miss this hearing. And if you have an actual heart attack during the hearing, what happens to your children then?" The question stopped me cold. In my single-minded focus on the legal battle, I'd ignored the toll it was taking on my physical health. The sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the emotional weight of listening to recordings of my children being programmed to hate me, all of it had accumulated into a medical crisis. Dr. Kim prescribed anxiety medication and ordered me to take at least 24 hours of complete rest. No legal documents, no phone calls, no preparation. Your body needs recovery time. But rest was impossible when I knew that in less than 12 hours, I would finally have the chance to present evidence that could reunite me with my children. I called David from the hospital to make sure the hearing would proceed as scheduled. Of course we're going forward," he assured me. "But Marcus, you need to take care of yourself. Your children need you healthy and present, not stressed to the point of medical emergency." I spent that night in my empty house, taking the prescribed medication and trying to process everything that had led to this moment. The investigation, the evidence gathering, the emotional devastation of watching my children being systematically turned against me. It had all been building toward tomorrow's hearing. The stress response had been triggered by something Sandra had told me during our final conversation. She'd revealed that Sarah was planning to request permission to move permanently to Nevada with the children, regardless of the hearing's outcome. She thinks if she can delay long enough, if she can make the children more resistant to you, eventually, a judge will decide that moving them again would be too traumatic. Sandra had explained that realization that Sarah was playing a longer game, that even winning custody might not end the battle, had pushed my stress levels beyond what my body could handle. But lying in my hospital bed, wearing the plastic bracelet that proved even my physical health had become casualty in this war for my children, I experienced something unexpected: clarity. For months, I'd been so focused on legal strategy and evidence gathering that I'd lost sight of the ultimate goal. This wasn't about winning against Sarah or proving her wrong or even achieving justice for the wrongs that had been done. This was about saving my children from ongoing psychological damage and rebuilding our relationship as a family. The medical emergency had forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. I'd been so consumed with fighting for my children that I'd nearly destroyed my ability to actually parent them. What good would winning custody do if I was too stressed, too angry, too emotionally damaged to provide the stable, loving environment they desperately needed? Dr. Kim's words echoed in my mind. Your children need you healthy and present. Not just legally present, but emotionally and physically present. Not just fighting for them, but ready to be their father again. I called Rebecca from the hospital to share this realization. I need to be prepared for what comes after we win, I told her. Assuming the court rules in our favor, I'm going to have 3 traumatized children who've been taught to fear and resent me. Legal victory is just the beginning. That's exactly right, Rebecca said. The custody hearing determines where they live. Everything after that is about healing. We discussed transition plans for the children, therapy options, and strategies for rebuilding trust. Rebecca had already arranged for child psychologists to be available immediately after the hearing to help with whatever emotional crisis might arise when the children were returned to my custody. They're going to be confused and possibly angry, she warned. Sarah has convinced them that you're the source of their problems. When they're forced to leave her, they might blame you for that trauma too. The medication Dr. Kim had prescribed helped me sleep that night, but I woke up several times thinking about Emma's panic attacks, Jake's nightmares, and Lily's fear of male authority figures. These children would need enormous patience and love to overcome the psychological damage that had been inflicted on them. The morning of the hearing, I felt physically better but emotionally raw. The stress response had been like lancing a wound, painful but necessary to release pressure that had been building for months. David picked me up at 7 a.m., and we drove to the courthouse in relative silence. Everything that could be said had been said. Everything that could be prepared had been prepared. Now it was just a matter of presenting the truth and trusting that justice would prevail. "How are you feeling?" David asked as we parked outside the family court building. "Terrified," I admitted. "Not about the hearing. I'm confident about the evidence. I'm terrified about what comes next. What if I can't reach them? What if the damage is too severe to repair?" "Then you keep trying," David said simply. "You love them, and eventually love wins. It might take time, it might require professional help, but love wins." As we walked toward the courthouse, carrying boxes of evidence documenting the systematic destruction and potential rebuilding of my family, I thought about the plastic hospital bracelet still on my wrist, a reminder that fighting for my children had nearly cost me my health, but also proof that some battles are worth any sacrifice today. I would learn whether months of investigation, legal strategy, and emotional devastation had been enough to save my relationship with my children today. I would discover if the truth was powerful enough to overcome lies, if love could triumph over manipulation, if justice existed for families torn apart by greed and psychological abuse. Today everything would change. The only question was whether I was strong enough physically and emotionally to handle whatever came next. But as I looked at that hospital bracelet one more time before walking into the courthouse, I realized that strength wasn't the right word. I didn't need to be strong enough to handle the future. I just needed to be father enough. And despite everything Sarah had done to destroy my relationship with my children, despite all the evidence of manipulation and abuse, despite the stress that had nearly broken my body, was still their father. That would have to be enough to start with everything else. We could figure out together. Judge Catherine Morrison had been hearing family law cases for 18 years, and her reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for manipulation and deception. As she reviewed the mountain of evidence David and I had prepared, her expression grew increasingly grave. "This is an extraordinary case," Judge Morrison said, looking between our table and Sarah's attorney across the courtroom. "The documentation provided suggests systematic parental alienation, financial fraud, and possible conspiracy. I want to be very clear that this court takes the welfare of minor children as its primary concern." Sarah sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than I remembered, wearing a conservative dress that was clearly chosen to project maternal vulnerability. Derek wasn't present. Rebecca had confirmed he was still in Nevada, probably preparing their escape route if the hearing went badly. Sarah's attorney, Michael Brennan, had spent the morning trying to minimize the evidence we'd presented. He argued that Sarah was a struggling single mother making imperfect decisions under enormous stress, that her financial choices were private matters unrelated to her fitness as a parent. "Your Honor," Brennan said during his opening statement, "my client has provided a stable, loving environment for these children during a difficult transition. Mr. Chen's work obsession created an untenable family situation, and Ms. Patterson has done her best to shield the children from that trauma." But when David began presenting our evidence, the courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically. The first audio recording of Sarah coaching Emma to hate me was played in complete silence, with only the court reporter's fingers moving on her keyboard. "Emma, what do you remember about Daddy's job?" Sarah's voice filled the room. "He worked a lot," came Emma's small, uncertain response. "That's right, and what did that mean for our family?" "He wasn't home very much, and how did that make Mommy feel? Sad and lonely." Judge Morrison's expression hardened as she listened to the systematic programming of an 8-year-old child. When the recording ended, she looked directly at Sarah. "Miss Patterson, did you coach your daughter to give these responses?" "Your Honor, I was helping her process her feelings about that's not what I asked." "Did you coach your daughter to say specific things about her father?" Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "I was trying to help her understand why our family situation had changed, by teaching her to blame her father for your decision to leave the state with the children." The financial evidence was even more damning. David presented bank records showing Sarah's casino spending alongside her claims of poverty to the children. Photos of luxury purchases made with child support money, while telling Emma they couldn't afford school supplies. "Your Honor," David said, displaying surveillance photos on the courtroom's video screen, while Ms. Patterson was telling the children they might not have enough money for food. She was spending an average of $2,000 per week at various casinos. The most powerful testimony came from Sandra Patterson, Sarah's own mother. Sandra took the witness stand wearing a simple black dress and carrying herself with the dignity of someone who'd made a difficult but necessary choice. "Mrs. Patterson," David began gently, "you've been caring for your grandchildren for the past 3 months. Can you describe their emotional state?" "They're heartbroken," Sandra said simply. "They miss their father terribly, but they've been taught that missing him is wrong, that loving him is a betrayal of their mother." "Can you give the court a specific example?" Sandra pulled out a tissue before continuing. "Last week, Jake found a photo of Marcus in his backpack, one from before the separation, where they're both smiling. He started crying and said he missed his daddy. When Sarah found him with the photo, she told him that looking at pictures of his father would only make him sad, that he needed to let go of those feelings. What happened to the photograph?" "Sarah threw it away. Jake cried for hours. The courtroom was silent as Sandra described watching her daughter systematically destroy her grandchildren's relationship with their father. Her testimony was devastating, because it came from someone with no legal stake in the outcome, a grandmother who simply couldn't watch the psychological abuse continue. When David presented the children's intercepted letters to me, Judge Morrison requested to review them personally. She spent several minutes reading through Emma's words. "Dear Daddy, I miss you so much. Mommy says you don't want to see us anymore, but I don't understand why these letters were never delivered," Judge Morrison asked. "No, Your Honor," Sandra replied. "Sarah would take them and dispose of them. The children don't know their father never received their messages." The evidence of Derek's involvement added another layer of complexity to the case. Rebecca testified about the financial conspiracy, the coordinated manipulation, and Derek's history of similar relationships with other women. "This appears to be a pattern," Judge Morrison observed. "Mr. Vaughn targets financially stable women, introduces them to gambling, then helps them manipulate their existing relationships to maximize income." Sarah's attorney tried to present her as Derek's victim, arguing that she'd been manipulated and wasn't fully responsible for her actions. But the recorded conversations between Sarah and Derek contradicted this narrative, showing her as an active participant in planning the destruction of my relationship with the children. The most heartbreaking, the moment came when Judge Morrison reviewed the school reports documenting the children's deteriorating emotional state. Emma's panic attacks, Jake's nightmares, Lily's fear of male authority figures, all evidence of ongoing psychological trauma. "Dr. Martinez," Judge Morrison addressed the child psychologist, "in your professional opinion, are these children suffering harm in their current situation?" "Yes, Your Honor. The systematic alienation they're experiencing constitutes psychological abuse. The longer it continues, the more difficult it becomes to repair their ability to form healthy attachments." "And what is your recommendation?" "Immediate intervention to stop the alienation process. These children need therapy and gradual reintroduction to their father in a controlled environment. Most importantly, they need protection from further programming against him." Sarah finally took the witness stand in her own defense, and her testimony was a masterclass in manipulation and blame-shifting. She portrayed herself as a protective mother fleeing an emotionally absent father, making difficult decisions under impossible circumstances. "I never intended to hurt Marcus's relationship with the children," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I was trying to help them understand why our family had changed." David's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. "Ms. Patterson, you testified that you were protecting the children from their father's emotional absence. Yet you spent over $8,000 last month on casino gambling while claiming you couldn't afford their school supplies. Can you explain that discrepancy?" "Those charges weren't. I was under enormous stress. Is gambling an appropriate stress relief activity for someone claiming to lack money for children's necessities? I made mistakes. I was depressed and not thinking clearly. Yet surveillance evidence shows you gambling regularly for months before leaving your husband. This wasn't stress-related decision-making. This was a sustained pattern of behavior, wasn't it?" Sarah's composure finally collapsed completely. She began crying uncontrollably, claiming she'd never meant to hurt anyone, that she'd just been trying to survive an impossible situation. But Judge Morrison had heard enough. "Ms. Patterson, I've reviewed extensive evidence of systematic parental alienation, financial fraud, and conspiracy to manipulate these proceedings. Your actions have caused significant psychological harm to your children while enriching yourself at their father's expense." The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Immediate temporary custody to me, with Sarah receiving supervised visitation only, mandatory counseling for all parties, with specific requirements that Sarah undergo evaluation for gambling addiction and psychological manipulation behaviors. "These children have been victims of psychological abuse disguised as maternal protection," Judge Morrison stated. "This court will not allow that abuse to continue." As the gavel fell, I felt a mixture of relief, vindication, and terror. I'd won. My children were coming home, but the real work was just beginning. Sarah's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She began screaming that I was stealing her children, that the court didn't understand how dangerous I was, that this ruling would destroy their lives. Security had to escort her from the courtroom while she continued shouting threats and accusations. Her final words were directed at me. "You'll never win their love back. They'll hate you forever." But as I watched her being led away, I realized that Sarah had already lost the most important battle. The truth had been revealed, justice had been served, and my children would finally be protected from further psychological manipulation. Now came the hardest part, earning back their trust and rebuilding our family from the wreckage Sarah had created. But for the first time in months, I had hoped that love could triumph over lies, that patience could heal the wounds inflicted by hatred, and that my children and I could find our way back to each other. The court had given me the legal right to be their father again. Now I had to prove I was worthy of that privilege. The transition happened immediately. Judge Morrison had ordered that the children be removed from Sarah's custody that same day. citing the urgent need to stop ongoing psychological damage. A court-appointed child advocate, Maria Santos, accompanied me to Sandra's house to facilitate what everyone knew would be a traumatic separation. Sandra met us at the door with red eyes and a heavy heart. "They don't understand what's happening," she said quietly. "Sarah told them this morning that you were trying to steal them away from her." Inside, I found my children huddled together on the living room couch, looking terrified and confused. Emma clutched Lily protectively while Jake pressed against his older sister's side. They looked at me like I was a stranger coming to destroy their world, which, from their perspective, I was. "Hi, sweetheart," I said gently to Emma, kneeling down to her eye level. "I'm here to take you home." "We don't want to go with you," Emma said, her voice shaking but defiant. "We want to stay with Mommy and Grandma." "I know this is scary," Maria said, her voice professionally calm. "But the judge decided it would be best for you to live with your daddy for a while." "Why?" Jake asked, tears starting to form. "Did we do something bad?" The question broke my heart. These children had been taught that family separations were punishments, that love was conditional, that fathers could simply decide to abandon their families. They were interpreting their forced return to me as evidence of their own wrongdoing. "You didn't do anything bad," I said firmly. "You're wonderful, perfect children, and I love you more than anything in the world. We're going home so we can be a family again." But Sarah's programming ran deep. Emma shook her head vigorously. "You don't really want us." Mommy explained about how you chose work over us. "You're only taking us because the mean judge made you." "That's not true, Emma. I've been fighting for months to bring you home because I miss you so much." "Then why didn't you visit us more?" she challenged. "Why didn't you call us?" I looked at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. We'd discussed how to handle these questions. Sarah had told that needed to be gently corrected without immediately contradicting their mother. "I tried to visit you more, sweetheart. I asked the court for more time together, but I had to follow the judge's rules about when I could see you. But Mommy said sometimes grown-ups have different ideas about what's best." I said carefully, "What matters now is that we're going to be together, and I'm going to take very good care of you." The packing process was heartbreaking. The children moved like they were in a trance, mechanically gathering their belongings while Sarah sat in her bedroom refusing to come out. Sandra helped fold clothes and pack toys, whispering reassurances to the children that their daddy loved them and would keep them safe. "Will we see Mommy again?" Lily asked in her small voice, the first words she'd spoken since I arrived. "Yes, baby," I said, picking her up despite her initial resistance. "Mommy will visit you soon." But even as I said it, I wondered if that was true. Sarah's behavior in the courtroom had been so erratic, so threatening, that I wasn't sure she'd be granted visitation rights anytime soon. The car ride home was silent except for soft crying from the back seat. Through the rearview mirror, I could see Emma holding Jake's hand while Lily sat in her car seat looking lost and confused. They were physically in my custody, but emotionally they were miles away from me when we pulled into our driveway, their driveway. The home they'd lived in for their entire lives. The children stared at the house like they'd never seen it before. "Everything that looks the same," Jake said with wonder. "Of course it does," I replied. "This is your home. Your rooms are exactly the way you left them." I'd maintained their bedrooms like shrines during the months they'd been gone. Emma's butterfly decorations, Jake's dinosaur collection, Lily's crib with a mobile that played lullabies, everything untouched and waiting for their return. But walking through the house with them felt surreal. They moved cautiously, like visitors in a museum, touching their own belongings with uncertainty. "Can we really stay here?" Emma asked, standing in the doorway of her bedroom. "This is your home, sweetheart. You're staying here with me." "But what if Mommy needs us?" She said she can't survive without us. Another one of Sarah's manipulations, convincing the children that they were responsible for their mother's emotional well-being. I made a mental note to discuss this with Dr. Martinez during our upcoming therapy sessions. That first evening was awkward and painful. The children picked at their dinner, ate mechanically, and responded to my questions with polite but distant answers. They were going through the motions of being home while clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Bedtime was the worst. Lily cried for her mommy until she exhausted herself. Jake had a nightmare and woke up screaming, then seemed surprised when I came to comfort him instead of Sarah. Emma lay awake staring at the ceiling, occasionally sniffling but refusing to let me see her cry. "I know this is hard," I said, sitting on the edge of Emma's bed. "It's okay to miss Mommy. It's okay to be confused about why things changed." "Mommy said you would try to make us forget about her," Emma said quietly. "I would never do that. Mommy is your mother, and she'll always be your mother. Nothing can change that." "Then why can't we live with her?" It was the question I'd been dreading. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her mother has been psychologically abusing her? How do you reveal that someone she loves has been systematically destroying her relationship with her father? "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt children without meaning to," I said carefully. "The judge decided it would be better for you to live here while we figure out how to make things better for everyone. Did you make mistakes too?" The question pierced straight through me. "Yes, Emma, I made lots of mistakes. I worked too much and didn't spend enough time with you when we were all living together. I'm sorry for that." and I want to do better. It was a small breakthrough, the first real conversation we'd had since the reunion. Emma seemed surprised by my admission of fault, probably because Sarah's narrative had painted me as someone who blamed everyone else for problems. The next few days were a roller coaster of emotions. The children would have moments of normal behavior, playing with toys they'd missed, enjoying familiar foods, laughing at jokes, followed by periods of withdrawal and sadness. They called for their mother constantly, especially Lily, who didn't understand why the most important person in her world had suddenly disappeared. Sarah's scheduled visitation call came 3 days after the custody transfer. I handed the phone to Emma first, listening to her side of the conversation with growing concern. "Yes, Mummy, we're okay. No, Daddy hasn't been mean to us. I miss you too. ... When can you come get us?" When Emma handed the phone to Jake, his conversation followed a similar pattern, but I could hear Sarah's voice through the phone, and it was clear she was continuing her manipulation campaign even through supervised calls. After the children went to bed, I called David to report the conversation. "She's still programming them," I said. "She's telling them this is temporary, that she's working to bring them home, that I'm keeping them away from her." "Document everything," David advised. "If she violates the court order regarding alienation behaviors, we can request that her phone privileges be supervised or limited." But the most difficult consequence of Sarah's actions wasn't legal, it was emotional. My children were home physically, but psychologically they were still trapped in the false reality she'd created. They looked at me with suspicion, flinched when I tried to show affection, and constantly questioned whether they were safe or wanted. "Will you send us away if we're too much trouble?" Jake asked one morning over breakfast. "Never," I said firmly. "Nothing you could do would ever make me send you away. You're my children, and I love you no matter what." "But Mommy said you got tired of taking care of us before." "That's not true, buddy. I never got tired of you. I made mistakes about how I balanced work and family time, but I never, ever got tired of being your daddy." These conversations were landmines scattered throughout our daily life. Every innocent question revealed another layer of Sarah's psychological manipulation, another lie that needed gentle correction without making the children feel caught between their parents. The consequences for Sarah herself were swift and severe. Within a week of the custody hearing, she'd been served with papers for contempt of court. Based on her continued violation of the alienation prohibitions during phone calls, her supervised visitation was suspended pending a psychological evaluation and completion of a parental education program. Derek had disappeared entirely. Rebecca's investigation revealed that he'd left Nevada immediately after the court ruling and was now apparently targeting a divorced mother in Arizona. His pattern was consistent: find vulnerable women with financial resources, introduce them to gambling, then help them manipulate their family relationships for profit. "He's moved on to his next victim," Rebecca told me during our final meeting. "Sarah was just another mark to him. Now that the income stream has been cut off, he has no reason to maintain contact with her." This abandonment was devastating for Sarah, who called me one evening crying hysterically. "Marcus, Derek's gone. He won't answer my calls. His apartment is empty. What am I supposed to do?" I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and pity listening to her desperation. Part of me wanted to remind her that she'd destroyed our family for someone who'd never actually cared about her, but a larger part of me just felt sad for the woman I'd once loved, who'd been manipulated into destroying everything that mattered. "I can't help you with Derek," I said gently, "but if you want to rebuild a relationship with the children, you need to focus on getting the help the court ordered. You don't understand. I can't afford the therapy, the parenting classes, the psychological evaluation. I used all my money, our money, and now I have nothing." The irony was bitter. Sarah had spent tens of thousands of dollars of child support money gambling with Derek, and now couldn't afford the programs required to see her children again. "Maybe your parents can help," I suggested. "They're furious with me. My father says I'm no longer welcome in their house. My mother cries every time she looks at me." Sandra had indeed cut off financial support for Sarah after learning the full extent of her daughter's deception. She'd continued to serve as an intermediary for the children's transition, but her relationship with Sarah was permanently damaged. "Destroyed everything," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "My marriage, my children, my family, my relationship with Derek. I have nothing left. Despite everything she'd done to me and our children, I couldn't bring myself to feel triumphant about her suffering." "You can still fix your relationship with the kids," I said. "It will take time and work, but they still love you. They hate me now. Emma won't even talk to me during our phone calls anymore." This was true. Emma had become increasingly resistant to Sarah's manipulation during their supervised conversations. When Sarah would try to plant seeds of doubt about me or suggest that the custody arrangement was temporary, Emma would change the subject or ask to hang up. "She doesn't hate you," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was accurate. "She's just confused and hurt. Children are resilient. Sarah, if you do the work to get healthy, if you stop trying to manipulate them, they'll forgive you. What if they don't? What if I've lost them forever?" It was a question I'd asked myself during those months of supervised visitation when my own children looked at me like a stranger. Then you'll have to live with the consequences of your choices, I said, but that doesn't mean you stop trying to make amends. After that conversation, Sarah seemed to disappear from our lives entirely. The court-ordered phone calls stopped happening because she simply didn't call. Her supervised visitation appointments went unattended. It was as if the combination of losing Derek and facing the reality of what she'd done to her children had broken something fundamental inside her. Sandra kept me informed about Sarah's condition. She's living in a studio apartment near the casino, Sandra reported during one of her visits with the children. She's not working, barely eating, and I think she's still gambling with whatever money she can find. Has she asked about the kids? Not directly. I think she's too ashamed. She knows she's lost them, and she doesn't know how to face that reality. The children's reactions to their mother's absence were complex and heartbreaking. Initially, they asked about her constantly, worried that something terrible had happened. When I explained that Mummy was taking some time to work on herself, they seemed to understand on some level, but as weeks passed without contact, their questions became more pointed. Doesn't Mummy miss us? Jake asked. Did we do something to make her not want to see us? Mummy loves you very much, I assured him. Sometimes grown-ups have problems they need to solve before they can be good parents. It's not your fault, and it doesn't mean she doesn't love you. Emma, always perceptive, seemed to grasp more of the truth than her younger siblings. Mummy was lying to us about you, wasn't she? She asked one evening while I was reading her a bedtime story. It was the first time she'd directly acknowledged the manipulation. What makes you think that? You're not mean like she said you would be. You make us breakfast and help with homework and read stories. You don't act like someone who doesn't want us. I've always wanted you, sweetheart. I missed you every single day you were gone. Then why did Mummy say you didn't? I took a deep breath, knowing this conversation would be crucial for Emma's healing. Sometimes when grown-ups are very sad or scared, they say things that aren't true. Mummy was going through a hard time and she made mistakes about what to tell you kids. Big mistakes, Emma said solemnly. Yes, very big mistakes. Will she ever tell us she's sorry? I don't know, baby, I hope so. But even if she doesn't, you need to know that none of this was your fault. You and Jake and Lily are perfect exactly the way you are. The consequences of Sarah's actions rippled far beyond our immediate family. Her parents' marriage was strained by the discovery of their daughter's deception. Sarah's sister refused to speak to her. Friends who'd lent money based on Sarah's lies about my financial control felt betrayed and angry. But the most profound consequence was the slow revelation to my children of how thoroughly they'd been manipulated. As their initial programming wore off and they rediscovered their genuine feelings for me, they began to understand that their mother had systematically lied to them about the most fundamental relationships in their lives. I'm angry at Mummy, Jake announced one day, completely out of the blue. Why are you angry? Because she told me you didn't love me, but you do love me. She told me wrong things. It's okay to feel angry about that, I said. But remember that Mummy loves you too, even though she made mistakes about how to show it. The legal consequences continued to unfold as well. The district attorney had reviewed Rebecca's evidence and was considering fraud. Charges related to Sarah's misuse of child support funds. Derek was being investigated across multiple states for similar patterns of financial manipulation and conspiracy. But for me, the most important consequence was positive. My children were healing. Slowly, gradually, but unmistakably, they were remembering how to trust me, how to accept my love, how to believe that their father would never abandon them. The damage Sarah had done was real and lasting. It would take years of therapy and patience to fully repair, but love was proving stronger than lies, truth more powerful than manipulation, and family bonds more resilient than the forces that had tried to destroy them. Sarah had lost everything. In her attempt to take everything from me, the consequences of her choices had isolated her from her children, her family, and even the man she'd destroyed our marriage to be with. Justice had been served, but it felt more like tragedy than triumph sometimes. The greatest victory is also the saddest story. The first genuine breakthrough came 6 weeks after the children returned home. I was making pancakes on a Saturday morning when Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding something behind her back with a shy smile on her face. I made you something, she said, her voice tentative but warm in a way I hadn't heard since before Sarah left with them. She handed me a handmade card with "I love you, Daddy" written in her careful second-grade cursive, decorated with butterflies and hearts. Inside, she'd written, "Thank you for bringing us home. I'm sorry I was mean to you, love, Emma." I had to set the card down and take a deep breath before responding, overwhelmed by the first voluntary expression of love I'd received from my daughter in almost a year. "This is the most beautiful card I've ever gotten," I said, kneeling down to hug her. This time, she hugged back without reservation. "I was scared you were going to be mean like Mummy said," Emma admitted. "But you're not mean, you're just Daddy." "I'm just Daddy," I agreed, fighting back tears. "And I love you more than all the stars in the sky." The card became the first entry in what I started calling our rebuilding journal, a collection of small moments, breakthrough conversations, and evidence that my children were slowly finding their way back to trusting me. Dr. Martinez had been working with all 3 children individually, helping them process the confusion and trauma of the past year. Family therapy sessions were scheduled twice a week, providing a safe space for us to address the lingering effects of Sarah's manipulation. Children are remarkably resilient, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. Emma is beginning to understand that she was given false information about you. The younger children are responding well to consistent, predictable love and care. Jake's healing showed itself differently. Where Emma processed things intellectually, Jake needed physical reassurance. He started crawling into my bed during thunderstorms, something he hadn't done since he was 3. He asked me to carry him upstairs, to help him reach things he could manage alone, to sit with him during every meal. He's testing whether you'll reject him if he becomes too needy, Dr. Martinez observed. Sarah programmed him to believe that fathers abandon children who require too much attention. So I embraced Jake's neediness, understanding that every piggyback ride and bedtime story was rebuilding his fundamental trust in parental love. I carried him when he asked, read extra stories, and never once suggested he was being too clingy. Lily's recovery was the most dramatic because her memories of Sarah's programming were less concrete. At not quite 3 years old, she adapted to our renewed relationship with the flexibility of early childhood. Within 2 months, she was calling me Dada with genuine excitement again, running to me when she got hurt, and falling asleep peacefully in my arms. But even as the children healed, we had to navigate the complex reality that their mother had simply vanished from their lives. Sarah's court-ordered therapy appointments went unattended. Her supervised visitation rights were suspended indefinitely due to non-compliance. Phone calls that were supposed to happen twice a week simply didn't occur because Sarah didn't call. "Where did Mummy go?" Jake asked one evening after bath time. "Mummy is taking some time to work on herself," I explained, using the language Dr. Martinez had suggested. "Sometimes grown-ups need help learning how to be better parents, but why doesn't she'll call us anymore?" It was the question I'd been dreading. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that his mother's shame and mental health struggles have led her to abandon contact with her own children? "I think Mummy feels very sad about some mistakes she made," I said carefully. "Sometimes when people feel that sad, they need time alone to figure out how to feel better." "Did we make her feel sad?" "No, buddy. You and Emma and Lily never did anything wrong. Mummy's sadness is about grown-up problems that have nothing to do with you kids." These conversations were landmines that required delicate navigation. I had to acknowledge the children's need to understand their mother's absence without either demonizing Sarah or taking responsibility for her choices. The children's school became an important partner in their healing process. Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's teacher, worked with Dr. Martinez to create a supportive classroom environment. Emma's academic performance began improving as her anxiety decreased and her sense of security returned. "She's like a different child," Mrs. Rodriguez reported during a parent conference. "The withdrawn, fearful girl from earlier this year has been replaced by the confident, engaged student I remember from before the family crisis." Jake's preschool reported similar improvements. His aggressive behavior toward other children had completely stopped, replaced. The breakthrough moment that convinced me we were truly healing came during a family therapy session about 3 months after the custody change. Dr. Martinez was working with Emma on expressing her feelings about the past year when Emma said something that stunned everyone in the room. "I think Mummy was sick in her brain," Emma said with 8-year-old directness, like how some people get sick in their bodies and need medicine. But instead of medicine, Mommy needed someone to help her think better thoughts. "That's a very wise way to understand it," Dr. Martinez said. "How does it feel to think about Mummy that way?" "Sad but not angry. I'm still mad that she told me lies about Daddy, but I understand that sick people sometimes do things they wouldn't do if they were healthy." The maturity and compassion in Emma's response took my breath away. Despite everything Sarah had put her through, my 8-year-old daughter was finding a way to forgive her mother while still protecting herself from further manipulation. Became the foundation for rebuilding trust. I involved the children in age-appropriate decisions about meals, activities, and household rules. We established new traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon bike rides, bedtime stories where each child got to choose the book. "Ask us what we want," Jake observed one day. "Mummy used to just tell us what was happening." "Families work better when everyone gets to have a say," I explained. "Your opinions matter to me." The children began expressing preferences and desires they'd kept hidden during the months with Sarah. Emma wanted to take art classes. Jake wanted to learn to play soccer. Lily wanted a pet fish. Small requests that represented their growing confidence that their needs and wants would be respected. I said yes to everything reasonable and worked with them to problem solve the requests that needed modification. Art classes became a weekly activity. Soccer lessons started that fall. We got a beautiful blue betta fish that Lily named Bubble. "You really mean it when you say yes," Emma said after we'd set up Bubble's aquarium. "What do you mean? When you say we can do something, we actually get to do it." Mommy used to say maybe a lot, but maybe always meant no. These casual observations revealed how thoroughly Sarah had controlled and disappointed the children, making promises she never intended to keep while blaming their father for the family's limitations. The most powerful healing tool turned out to be photo albums and videos from before the separation. I'd avoided looking at these during the worst of the custody battle, but Dr. Martinez suggested they might help the children reclaim their authentic memories of our family. "Look, it's our camping trip," Jake exclaimed, pointing at photos from the previous summer. "I remember this. You taught me how to make s'mores, and here's when you helped me build my butterfly garden," Emma added, studying a picture of us planting flowers together. The photos told a story that contradicted everything Sarah had taught them about our relationship. They showed a father who'd been present for birthday parties, school events, family vacations, and countless ordinary moments. The children began remembering experiences they'd been programmed to forget or reinterpret negatively. "We were happy before," Emma said, looking through the albums, "all of us together." "Yes, we were, and we can be happy again, even though our family looks different now. Will Mommy ever come back?" It was the question they all asked in different ways, at different times. "I don't know, sweetheart. That depends on whether Mommy decides to do the work she needs to do to be healthy again." "I miss her," Emma admitted, "but I don't miss being scared all the time." "You don't have to choose between missing Mommy and feeling safe with me," I assured her. "Both of those feelings are okay." By the 6-month mark, the transformation was remarkable. The children who'd returned to me fearful and withdrawn had rediscovered their personalities, their confidence, and their capacity for joy. They laughed easily, asked for help without fear, and expressed love freely. The house that had felt like a mausoleum during their absence was once again filled with the beautiful chaos of family life. Toys scattered across the living room floor, children's artwork covering the refrigerator, bedtime conversations that stretched on because nobody wanted the day to end. "We're okay now," Jake announced one evening as I tucked him into bed. "Yes, buddy, we're okay now, and you're not going anywhere." "I'm not going anywhere. I'm your daddy forever, no matter what." He smiled and closed his eyes, finally able to fall asleep without fear that the most important person in his world might disappear by morning. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, but love, patience, and consistency had proven stronger than the lies and manipulation that had tried to destroy our family. We were healing, we were whole, we were home. 1 year after the custody hearing, our lives had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. The calendar on our kitchen wall covered in colorful stickers marking school events, soccer practices, art classes, and family activities had become the symbol of our rebuilt life together. Emma had not only recovered academically but was thriving in ways that surprised even her teachers. Her confidence had returned stronger than before, and she'd developed what Dr. Martinez called emotional wisdom, an unusual ability for a 9-year-old to understand complex family dynamics while protecting her own well-being. I wrote a story about families for English class, Emma told me one afternoon, pulling a stapled packet of papers from her backpack. Mrs. Rodriguez said it was really good. The story was titled "When Families Break and Fix Again," and reading it was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Emma had written about a little girl whose parents separated, who got confused by things adults told her, but who eventually learned that love was stronger than problems. "Sometimes families break like a favorite toy," she'd written in her careful cursive, "but just like toys, they can be fixed if someone cares enough to put them back together with patience and love." "This is beautiful, sweetheart," I said, fighting back tears as I read her story. "You're an amazing writer. I want to show it to Mummy someday," Emma said quietly, "when she's ready to see us again." Sarah had finally begun attending court-ordered therapy 6 months after losing custody, but her progress was slow and inconsistent. She'd completed the parenting education program and was working on her gambling addiction, but she still hadn't requested visitation with the children. "She calls the courthouse every few weeks to ask about her case," David had informed me during our last check-in, "but she hasn't filed any motions for increased contact. I think she's afraid the children won't want to see her." Her fear wasn't entirely wrong. While the children had processed their anger and confusion about Sarah's manipulation, they'd also grown comfortable with the stability of their current life. They asked about her less frequently, and when they did, it was with curiosity rather than longing. Jake had blossomed into the confident, funny 6-year-old I remembered from before the separation. His soccer coach called him a natural leader on the field, and his preschool teacher reported that he was one of the most emotionally mature children in his class. "I taught Tommy how to tie his shoes today," Jake announced proudly after school. "One day he was crying because he couldn't do it, so I showed him the bunny ear way you taught me." "That was very kind of you, buddy." "Tommy doesn't have a daddy," Jake said matter-of-factly. "His mommy told my teacher that his daddy lives far away and doesn't visit." I felt sad for him. That must be hard for Tommy. I told him that some daddies make mistakes, but that doesn't mean Tommy isn't a good kid. "You told me that once when I was sad about Mommy." The wisdom and empathy Jake had developed through his own experience of family trauma was remarkable. He'd learned to extend compassion to other children while maintaining healthy boundaries around his own emotions. Lily, now 3.5, had no conscious memory of the months with Sarah but occasionally displayed behaviors that reminded us of that difficult period. She was more clingy than her siblings had been at the same age and needed extra reassurance during transitions or changes in routine. Daddy stay. She would ask whenever I left for work, even though she'd been attending the same daycare happily for months. Daddy always comes back, I would assure her. After snack time and story time and playground time, Daddy will be here to take you home. Dr. Martinez explained that Lily's anxiety was a normal response to early trauma, even trauma she couldn't fully remember. Her nervous system learned to expect abandonment during a critical developmental period, she said. Consistent routines and reliable caregiving are gradually rewiring those early fear responses. Our evening routines had become sacred rituals that provided security for all the children. Dinner together at the kitchen table, homework help for Emma, playtime for Jake, bath time for Lily, and stories for everyone. No work calls, no distractions, just focused family time. This is my favorite time of day, Emma said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. Why? Because we're all here together and nobody is sad or worried. It feels safe. Safety had become the foundation of our rebuilt family. Not just physical safety, but emotional safety. The confidence that love wouldn't be withdrawn, that promises would be kept, that family was permanent regardless of behavior or circumstances. I'd made significant changes to my work life as well. Honoring the lessons I'd learned about the importance of presence and balance, I'd turned down a promotion that would have required extensive travel and had negotiated a flexible schedule that allowed me to attend school events and be home for dinner most nights. You're different than before, Emma observed one Saturday morning as we worked together in the garden she'd redesigned around her butterfly theme. How am I different? You're more here. Like even when you're working, you're still thinking about us. Before, it felt like work was the most important thing and we were just something you had to take care of after. Her perception was painfully accurate. I'm sorry I made you feel that way before. It's okay. You didn't know how it felt to us, but now you do, so you do it better. Emma's forgiveness was complete and unconditional, but it came with the expectation that I'd continue to prioritize our relationship. She'd learned to value consistency over grand gestures, presence over presence. Our social life had also evolved to center around family activities and relationships that supported the children's healing. We'd connected with other families through the children's schools and activities, building a community of mutual support. Are you ever going to get married again? Jake asked one day, completely out of the blue. I don't know, buddy. Right now I'm focused on being the best daddy I can be to you and Emma and Lily. But what if you met someone nice who wanted to be our new mummy? What if that ever happened? It would have to be someone who understood that you three are the most important people in my life. And she'd have to be someone you liked too. Okay, but she'd have to like dinosaurs, Jake added seriously, and butterflies for Emma and fish for Lily. Those would definitely be requirements, I agreed, touched by his matter-of-fact acceptance of the possibility while ensuring his interests would be protected. The children had developed their own ways of processing their experiences and helping each other heal. Emma had become fiercely protective of Jake and Lily, while Jake had appointed himself the family comedian, using humor to lighten difficult moments. Remember when we thought Daddy didn't love us? Jake said one evening during bath time, splashing Lily and making her giggle. That was silly, Lily replied. Daddy loves us the most. We were confused because Mommy told us wrong things, Emma added, but we figured it out. Their ability to discuss the manipulation they'd experienced without shame or ongoing trauma was a testament to the healing work we'd all done together. They understood what had happened to them without carrying blame or resentment. The anniversary of the custody hearing passed quietly, marked only by my private reflection on how much had changed in 12 months. The children were thriving academically, socially, and emotionally. Our home was filled with laughter and love again. The wounds Sarah had inflicted were healing into scars that would remind us of our resilience rather than our vulnerability. We should do something special this weekend, I announced on Friday evening, just because we're a happy family and that's worth celebrating. Can we go to the beach? Emma asked. And build sand dinosaurs, Jake added. Fish, Lily contributed, not entirely understanding but excited to participate. Beach it is, I said. We'll pack a picnic and spend the whole day together. As we planned our weekend adventure, I marveled at how natural this felt. 3 children chatter excitedly about an outing with their father, secure in the knowledge that promises made would be promises kept. We'd survived the worst crisis our family could face and emerged stronger than before. The challenges had taught us what truly mattered. Presence over productivity, love over achievement, family bonds over everything else. Sarah's absence still cast a shadow over our lives, but it was a shadow that was shrinking with each passing month. Children were learning that families could be different shapes and sizes, while still being complete and loving. Our new beginning wasn't the family structure I'd originally imagined, but it was real, healthy, and filled with hope. We'd built something beautiful from the wreckage of manipulation and betrayal, a home where love was consistent. Trust was earned through daily actions, and every family member knew they were valued exactly as they were. The calendar on our kitchen wall, covered in evidence of our busy, connected life together, represented more than just scheduled activities. It was proof that we'd created a future worth looking forward to, day by day, moment by moment, together. 2 years after the custody hearing, I found myself sitting in my home office late one evening, writing in the journal Dr. Martinez had suggested I keep during the early days of our family's healing, what had started as a therapeutic exercise, that had become a record of our journey from the wreckage of manipulation to the rebuilding of trust. Tonight Emma lost her first tooth, I wrote. She was so excited to put it under her pillow for the tooth fairy. But then she got sad and said she wished Mummy could see her growing up. I told her it was okay to miss Mummy while still being happy about losing teeth. She smiled and said I was getting better at understanding feelings. Sarah had finally requested supervised visitation 6 months earlier, after completing her court-ordered programs and maintaining sobriety from gambling for over a year. The reunification process was gradual and carefully monitored, but it represented the first step toward the children having a relationship with their mother again. The first visit had been awkward and emotional for everyone involved. Sarah looked older, thinner, and carried herself with a humility that was completely different from the defiant woman who'd been escorted from the courtroom 2 years before. "Hi, babies," she'd said quietly when the children entered the supervised visitation room, tears streaming down her face. "I've missed you so much." Emma had responded with careful politeness, Jake with shy uncertainty, and Lily with complete unfamiliarity. She didn't remember her mother at all. It was heartbreaking to watch, but also a reminder of the consequences that came with abandoning your children during their most formative years. "Mommy looks different," Jake had whispered to me after that first visit. "People sometimes change when they go through hard times," I'd explained. "What matters is whether the changes help them be better parents." The visits had gradually become more comfortable, though they remained carefully structured and time-limited. Sarah was working hard to rebuild relationships with the children, but she was essentially starting from scratch with kids who'd learned to live without her. "I know I can never undo the damage I caused," Sarah had told me during one of our brief conversations at a visitation exchange. "I don't expect forgiveness from them or from you. I just want the chance to be part of their lives again, in whatever way they'll allow." Her humility was genuine, but the children's responses were mixed. Emma had developed the emotional sophistication to maintain a relationship with her mother while protecting herself from potential future manipulation. Jake was gradually warming up to Sarah but remained cautious. Lily treated her like a friendly stranger rather than a parent. "I don't think Lily will ever really remember me as her mummy," Sarah had said sadly to the court-appointed supervisor. "She was so little when I left and I was gone for so long." The observation was probably accurate. Lily's real maternal relationship was now with Sandra, Sarah's mother, who'd maintained regular contact with the children throughout the entire crisis and had become their primary grandmother figure. "Grandma Sandra loves us the most," Lily had announced one day with 3-year-old certainty. She never went away. Sandra had indeed become the stable maternal presence in the children's lives, visiting twice a month and maintaining the kind of consistent, unconditional love that grandparents are meant to provide. Her betrayal of Sarah's lies had cost her the relationship with her daughter but had preserved her bond with her grandchildren. "I chose them over her," Sandra had told me privately. "It was the hardest decision of my life, but those babies needed at least one adult willing to tell the truth." As I reflected on the past 2 years, I was struck by how the crisis had revealed the true character of everyone involved. Derek had shown himself to be a predator who disappeared the moment his income stream was threatened. Sarah had ultimately shown the capacity for change, but only after losing everything that mattered. Sandra had demonstrated moral courage by choosing truth over family loyalty, and the children, my extraordinary children, had shown resilience, wisdom, and an incredible capacity for healing that continued to amaze me daily. Emma, now 10, had developed into a confident, empathetic, a leader among her peers. Her teachers consistently praised her emotional intelligence and her ability to help other children navigate social conflicts. The trauma she'd experienced had been transformed into a strength that allowed her to recognize and resist manipulation in all its forms. Jessie at school was being mean to the new girl, Emma had told me recently. She was saying things that weren't true to make other kids not want to be friends with her. I told Jessie that spreading lies about people is wrong, and I made sure the new girl knew that Jessie was just being a bully. "How did you know what to do?" "Because I remember what it felt like when someone told lies about you to make us not love you." I didn't want the new girl to feel that confused and sad. Jake, now 7, had channeled his experience into a deep empathy for other children facing family difficulties. His soccer coach had mentioned that Jake was always the first to comfort teammates who were upset, and his teacher noted that he had a special gift for helping classmates who seemed lonely or left out. "David at school lives with his grandma because his parents can't take care of him right now," Jake had explained one afternoon. I told him that families can be lots of different shapes, and that grandmas are really good at taking care of kids. "That was very wise, buddy," I know about different kinds of families now. Some kids live with both parents. Some live with one parent. Some live with grandparents or aunts and uncles. The important thing is that someone loves you and takes good care of you. Lily had no conscious memory of the trauma but had developed into a joyful, secure child who approached the world with confidence and curiosity. Her early attachment disruption had been healed through consistent love and attention, and she showed no signs of the anxiety that had characterized her early return home. "Daddy, do you think the fish dreams about swimming in the ocean?" She asked one morning while feeding Bubble. "What do you think?" "I think he dreams about having fish friends and swimming with dolphins, but I think he likes living with us too, because we take good care of him and he's safe." Her casual reference to safety as a fundamental requirement revealed how thoroughly she'd internalized the security of our rebuilt family. Safety wasn't something she worried about, it was something she expected. As I wrote in my journal that evening, I reflected on the lessons this crisis had taught me about fatherhood, family, and the resilience of love. I'd learned that being present was more important than being perfect, that children needed emotional security more than material abundance, and that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt through patience and consistency. I'd also learned about the insidious nature of manipulation and the importance of protecting children from adults who would use them as weapons in their own emotional wars. The experience had made me a more vigilant parent, but also a more grateful one. I used to take our normal family moments for granted. I wrote in my journal, "Now I understand that every bedtime story, every shared meal, every ordinary Tuesday evening is a gift that can be stolen if we're not careful to protect it." The children and I had developed new traditions that honored our journey while celebrating our future. Every month on the anniversary of their return home, we had what we called Family Day, a day dedicated entirely to activities they chose, with no obligations except being together. "For our next Family Day, I want to go to the zoo and then get ice cream and then watch movies in our pajamas," Emma had planned recently, and built a blanket fort. Jake had added, fish Lily had contributed, which we'd learned to interpret as either wanting to visit the aquarium section of the zoo or simply expressing enthusiasm for the plan. These family days had become sacred time that reinforced our bond and created new positive memories to balance the difficult ones from our past. I'd also maintained my relationship with Rebecca, the private investigator who'd been instrumental in documenting the truth about Sarah's manipulation. She'd become not just a professional contact but a friend who understood the complexities of family trauma and recovery. "Your kids are lucky," Rebecca had told me during our most recent conversation. "Most children who experience that level of parental alienation don't recover as completely as yours have. It's a testament to your persistence and their resilience. Some days I wonder if they'll ever fully trust that I won't disappear from their lives," I'd admitted. "Trust is built through daily actions over time. You've been showing up consistently for 2 years now. They're starting to believe that's permanent." The legal aspects of our case had finally been resolved completely. Sarah's visitation had been gradually increased to unsupervised day visits, though she'd never requested overnight custody. Derek had been prosecuted for fraud in 2 states and was serving a prison sentence that would keep him away from vulnerable families for several years. Justice isn't always swift, but it usually arrives eventually. David had observed when Derek's conviction was finalized, the financial recovery had been slower but steady. Much of the money Sarah had stolen couldn't be recovered, but I'd been awarded a judgment that would eventually be paid through wage garnishment if she ever returned to steady employment. More importantly, the children's college funds had been protected and were growing again. But the real measure of our recovery wasn't financial or legal, it was emotional. The children laughed easily, shared their feelings openly, and had learned to navigate the complexity of loving a mother who'd hurt them while building a secure relationship with the father who'd fought for them. "Do you think Mommy will ever to be completely better?" Emma had asked during one of our bedtime conversations. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I know that you kids are completely loved and completely safe, no matter what happens with Mommy. I hope she gets better because I want her to be happy," Emma had said with remarkable maturity. "But I also know that her happiness isn't my job. Taking care of myself and being a good kid is my job." The wisdom in her statement had taken my breath away. At 10 years old, Emma had learned boundaries that many adults struggle to maintain, the ability to love someone while protecting yourself from their dysfunction. As I reached the end of that evening's journal entry, I found myself writing about hope, not just hope for continued healing, but hope for what our family might become as the children grew up with the security and love they deserved. "Emma wants to be an art teacher when she grows up," I wrote. "She says she wants to help kids express their feelings through drawing and painting, especially kids who have trouble with words. Jake wants to be a soccer coach and also a helper for families. He's not sure what that job is called, but he wants to make sure all kids have someone who loves them. Lily says she wants to be a fish doctor, which I think means marine biologist." Their career aspirations reflected their experiences. They all wanted to help others in ways that related to their own journey through trauma and healing. They'd learned that adults could fail children, but also that healing was possible with the right support and love. The journal entry concluded with my thoughts about the story we'd survived and the lesson I'd want other parents to take from our Experience if you're a parent going through something similar. If someone is trying to turn your children against you, or if you're watching lies destroy your family relationships, don't give up. Document everything, seek professional help, and never stop fighting for the truth. Children are more resilient than we imagine, and love is more powerful than manipulation. But both require time and patience to triumph over lies. Most importantly, remember that being present is more valuable than being perfect. Your children need you to show up consistently, to listen to their feelings, and to demonstrate through daily actions that family love is permanent and unconditional. The damage that manipulation causes is real, but it's not permanent. With proper support, professional help, and an enormous amount of patience, families can heal from even the most systematic emotional abuse. Our story isn't unique. Parental alienation affects thousands of families every year, but recovery is possible. Justice, though sometimes delayed, can still be achieved. And children who've been taught to hate a loving parent can learn to trust again if that parent refuses to give up on them. It's been 2 years since I got my children back, and every day I'm grateful for the second chance we've been given to be a family. We're not the same people we were before this crisis. We're stronger, more aware, more appreciative of the ordinary moments that make up a life together. The woman I once loved tried to destroy our family for reasons I'll probably never fully understand. She succeeded in causing enormous pain and trauma that required years to heal, but she failed in her ultimate goal. She couldn't destroy the love between a father and his children. That love, tested by the worst imaginable circumstances, proved unbreakable. And that's the truth I want my children to carry with them as they grow up. That some bonds are stronger than any force that tries to sever them. That truth eventually emerges from even the most elaborate deception. And that families defined by love rather than biology can weather any storm. Tonight, as I finish writing this reflection, I can hear Emma reading a bedtime story to Lily while Jake organizes his dinosaur collection for tomorrow's show and tell. These are the sounds of a healed family, a restored home, a future filled with hope. We survived, we healed, we're home. I closed the journal and walked upstairs to check on my children one last time before bed. Emma was asleep with a book still in her hands. Jake was cuddled with his favorite stuffed dinosaur, and Lily was making soft breathing sounds with her arms wrapped around a small stuffed fish. Looking at their peaceful faces, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you fought the right fight for the right reasons. The battle for my children's hearts and minds had been the hardest thing I'd ever faced. But it had also been the most important. They were safe, they were loved, they were home, and that was everything.